Chapter 898. With a clear shout, the dagger in the Lang Kuan palace that was thousands of miles away flew forward and quickly killed the black stream of light. Golden sand and dust flew into the air. The wind howled. Xue Xue, who was following behind Rong Xiu, immediately shrank its neck and retreated. It had finally gotten the chance to take a shower a few days ago and cleaned up. It didn't want to be as sloppy as before. After a while, the surrounding wind and sand gradually calmed down, and the Red Moon Desert seemed to have returned to peace. Only the scorching sun continued to roast the earth, causing it to be scalding hot. Rong Xiu stopped in his tracks and looked up. In the vast desert there was no one else except him. A childish and cold voice entered his ears. "Someone bullied you, Rong Xiu paused, and a golden flame seemed to burn in his eyes, but it disappeared in an instant. "It's the Black Demon Cave." "Why would the Black Demon Cave find her?" This was Lan Zhao's voice. "Why didn't they stay in their own territory? Why did they come to Tianling?" Rong Xiu's thin lips curled up slightly and he chuckled. That person's physical body was destroyed a few years ago. Now only a soul is left, constantly residing in the bodies of cultivators and absorbing their cultivation to maintain its life. Whoosh! The yellow sand in front of him moved, and a blurry figure appeared in the lake. It looked like a 4 or 5-year-old child. "You know that person?" Dugu Mabao asked. "I've met him once." Rong Xiu narrowed his eyes, and there was an unfathomable look in his deep phoenix eyes. "I just didn't expect him to be so bold now. He even dared to touch you, Lan Xiao said lazily. "Who cares why he went to Tianling? If he wants to touch you, he's going against us." "Diwu, if I remember correctly, how much friendship do you have with the Black Demon Cave in the past?" Don't talk nonsense." Diwu Zhangzi immediately denied. "I'm not close to them." Lan Xiao chuckled. "Not close? If you're not close, why would they pay tribute to you for 10 years? I heard that the gifts they give you every year are piled up." "Stop!" Diwu Zhangzi shouted with a headache. "I was wrong, okay. Back then, I only thought that they went to ask for medicine. How would I know what they did in private? What's more, I didn't help them even once." Dugu Mabao said coldly. "You didn't help them because you're already trapped in the desert. If Diwu Zhangzi hadn't come here, he would have been killed by the Black Demon Caves." Diwu Zhangzi. What was this? He really had nothing to do with the Black Demon Cave. He had only agreed to meet them because of their 10 years of hard work. That meeting he didn't do anything. So many years had passed. Who would have thought that this matter would be brought up again at this time? Then why don't I go find the people from the Black Demon Cave and warn them?" Diwu Zhangzi asked tentatively. Looked like a ghost, she to her to twos to her was to her to the point. To her look to was to look, to her face was like a malicious ghost. She was wearing a bright red wedding dress, so the blood on her body didn't make it obvious. Only the spreading blood stains on her lower body showed how serious her injuries were at this moment. She raised her head with difficulty and looked at Chu Luiyue. Her eyes were filled with despair and desolation. At this moment she didn't even have the strength to hate Chu Luiyue. Chu Luiyue looked at her. "What's your relationship with that person just now?" Xuanhuan opened her mouth. Her voice was weak. Here, now. Kill me?" She knew that she wouldn't be able to survive today. That person just now had destroyed the last bit of life in her body. Now her body was just a broken shell. She would rather die than suffer the disdain, ridicule, and abuse of countless people. However, Chu Luiyue was unmoved. She only bent down and stared into Xuanhuan's eyes. "Let me ask you, how much do you know about that person just now?" Xuanhuan dared to be so arrogant because she had the help of that person just now. Speaking of which, she should know the most about that person. Xuanhuan laughed at herself. However, before the corners of her mouth could curl up, they drooped down and her face became a little gloomier. Chu Luiyue took a step back and raised her chin. "Qihan, wake her up." A figure walked out from the black cavalry again. Was Qihan. He walked straight to Xuanhuan's side and pulled her hair, forcing her to raise her head. His other hand quickly stuffed a medicinal pill into her mouth. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water, straightforward and decisive. Before Xuanhuan could cry out in pain, she felt the warm medicinal effect spread between her chest and abdomen. However, this didn't make her feel happy or relieved. Instead, it triggered a deeper fear. She hurriedly struggled and wanted to spit out the medicinal pill. However, the medicinal pill melted in her mouth and she had already swallowed it. "Now, do you have the strength to speak?" Chu Luiyue asked indifferently. Xuanhuan's heart was filled with resentment and fear. She couldn't help but wail. What do you want? I know you hate me. Kill me. She would rather die than suffer the pain of being trampled on and tortured in public. Chu Luiyue suddenly laughed. Her eyes were curved, but there was a hint of coldness in the corners of her eyes. You want to die? How can there be such a good thing? To be able to die quickly, in a sense, was also a relief. Xuanhuan had inflicted so much pain on her. How could she let her off so easily? Back then, she had chosen to commit suicide without hesitation because she couldn't bear the torture from the two of them. However, she didn't intend to give this opportunity to Xuanhuan. She blinked, looking at Xuanhuan as she said slowly and seriously, "You're right. Don't worry. Even if you don't want to say it now, you will say it sooner or later." Xuanhuan shuddered. In an instant, endless fear surged in her heart. I really don't know. I don't know anything. He appeared on his own. I was forced. Chu Luiyue suddenly shook her head. Don't worry. Think it through and tell me the whole story again. Don't waste my time. Then she tilted her head slightly and looked at Jiang Yuqing. She shook her head regretfully. TSK, what a pity. Your husband didn't say a single word of mercy for you from start to finish. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 900. Xuanhuan was already numb. Jiang Yuqing did not treat her with sincerity. She was already clear about it. He couldn't wait to push all the blame onto her, so how could he still speak up for her? Now that she thought about it, the years of love she thought were just her own wishful thinking. This wedding ceremony that she had meticulously prepared and looked forward to had finally become a huge joke. Xuanhuan closed her eyes in despair. Her tears seemed to have dried up, leaving her heart empty and sorrowful. Immediately, her eyes rolled back and she fainted. Take her away and take care of her. Chu Luiyue said indifferently. Yes. Qi Han hummed in response and quickly dragged Xuanhuan away, leaving behind a patch of scarlet bloodstains on the ground, indicating that something had happened here. Everyone looked at this scene in silence, and they all felt sorrow in their hearts. Who would have thought that Xuanhuan, who was so proud of her success, would end up like this overnight? From today onwards, the world was going to change completely. From the beginning to the end, there was one person who seemed to be indifferent to this, Jiang Yuqing. Even when he saw his newly married wife reduced to such a state, there was still no expression on his face, as if it had nothing to do with him. Only his blood-stained and empty sleeve reminded people that half of his arm had been chopped off. Chu Luiyue looked at Jiang Yuqing and flipped his wrist. Swoosh. The long yuan sword was pointed forward. The black blade was suffused with a cold light and emitted waves of chilling murderous intent. It was as if it could directly kill Jiang Yuqing in the next moment. Now it's your turn. Your Highness. A panicked and sorrowful cry was heard. Immediately, a figure suddenly rushed up from behind and stood in front of Jiang Yuqing. With a plop, he directly knelt on the ground. It was Jiang Lizhua. At this moment, the proud expression on his face had completely disappeared, leaving only a face full of panic. He knelt there and looked up at Chu Luiyue in despair. "Your Highness, please spare Yuqing's life." Chu Luiyue's eyes turned slightly, and he looked at him with amusement. "Grand Tutor Jiang, you should have heard and seen everything that happened just now. How can you still have the nerve to beg for mercy now? Jiang Yuqing colluded with xuanhuan to poison Imperial Father and this consort. Furthermore, he passed down a fake Imperial edict, framed a loyal official, and even attempted to exterminate the entire Chongshu Pavilion. Which of these actions wasn't a crime that deserved to be punished? Now you want this consort to spare him. Where does your confidence come from?" Jiang Lizhua was drenched in cold sweat, his complexion pale. How could he not know how serious these sins were? However, Jiang Yuqing was his eldest son and the son he doted on the most. When he saw Jiang Yuqing's arm being chopped off previously, he almost couldn't help but jump out. However, he was also stunned by everything that happened back then, so he forcefully held it in. But hearing Chu Luiyue's meaning now, he clearly wanted Jiang Yuqing's life. How could he sit still? "Yuqing? Yuqing has always liked you, so why would he harm you? Xuanhuan might hate you, but Yuqing doesn't. There must be a misunderstanding here. 2 years ago, when we were preparing for the wedding, Yuqing personally handled everything in the Jiang residence. He wanted to marry you smoothly more than anyone else, so why would he do those things afterward?" Jiang Lizhua knelt on the floor. "Your Highness, Yuqing had already mentioned this to me many years ago. He has admired you for many years, so he definitely wouldn't betray you." Chu Luiyue's lips curved up slightly. "This means that I remembered wrongly the person who killed me?" Jiang Lizhua was stumped. Perhaps he was forced, Grand Tutor Jiang." Chu Luiyue interrupted him with a calm expression. "Don't just beg for mercy for your son. You should also beg for your entire Jiang family." Jiang Lizhua was suddenly dazed upon hearing this. Jiang Yuqing has committed many crimes. Do you think that the Jiang family can completely wash off all of this? Just the fact that he tried to harm Father is enough to wipe out the entire family. You can't even protect yourself now, so why do you still have the energy to beg for mercy for Jiang Yuqing? Chu Luiyue reminded him kindly. "If you really want to cry, why don't you cry for your entire Jiang family first?" Jiang Lizhua really didn't think of this. Too many things happened today and the impact was too great, so he didn't think of this at all. When he saw Xuanhuan's pitiful appearance earlier, he was afraid that Jiang Yuqing would end up in the same state. Hence he hurriedly rushed out. But he didn't expect that the entire Jiang family would be implicated by Jiang Yuqing. Chu Luiyue's words were like a blow to the head, and it made Jiang Lizhua suddenly wake up. His dry and pale lips trembled violently, and his eyes were in a daze. Then immense fear surged out from his eyes. That's right. This is a huge crime that implicates the entire family. If the previous evidence wasn't sufficient, there was still room for rebuttal. But now, the princess and His Majesty have personally stepped forward to prove that the incident back then was indeed Jiang Yuqing's doing. What else is there to argue about? Yuqing, quickly say something. Jiang Lizhua instinctively looked at Jiang Yuqing. This son has been my pride since he was young, and he is always the most outstanding in all aspects. Later on, he was even more delighted when he agreed on the marriage with the princess. There are so many young talents in the Tianling dynasty, but the princess chose Yuqing. This is something that others can't be envious of. He originally thought that everything would proceed smoothly, but he didn't expect the princess to suddenly die, and the marriage was ruined. Jiang Lizhua was originally very disappointed, but Jiang Yuqing actually gradually became close to Xuanhuan again. Moreover, as he had previously helped the princess settle many things, he took the opportunity to take over these matters after the princess died and rapidly became a powerful figure in the entire Tianling dynasty. Regarding this, Jiang Lizhua was naturally happy. He didn't ask anything in detail and only felt that this son was very capable. Thus, he peacefully enjoyed the crowd's admiration and envy. Who would have thought that he actually did all these things in secret? Now that the truth has been revealed, there's no way to avoid it. Not only did the glory and wealth disappear in the blink of an eye, but even the entire Jiang family was implicated. Jiang Yuqing didn't seem to care about Jiang Lizhua's scolding and pleading. He looked at Chu Luiyue. Other than the initial shock, his emotions seemed to have calmed down. I didn't expect you to still be alive. Once Jiang Yuqing spoke, Jiang Lizhua instantly slumped to the ground, and his face turned ashen. He admitted it. Chu Liyue's red lips curved up slightly. Yes, I'm still alive. Are you very disappointed? Jiang Yuqing didn't answer her, and his expression became a little strange. That person helped you, right? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. He didn't feel it before, but now that he was in close combat, he suddenly realized that ruthless and straightforward figure was too familiar. Chu Liyue curled her lips into a smile. You guessed right. A strong sense of uneasiness surged in Jiang Yuqing's heart. He reached out to touch his chest as if wanting to take something out. However, Chu Liyue didn't give him the chance. She stared intently at Jiang Yuqing and shouted clearly. Explode. As soon as she finished speaking, Jiang Yuqing felt as if a flame had suddenly surged into his energy center. It was extremely painful. Previously, his lower abdomen had been aching from time to time, but he didn't take it to heart. Now, he was shocked to realize that this energy had actually burned into his energy center. No. As soon as he spoke, he felt a crazy and terrifying energy explode in his energy center. Boom. His core of essence shattered. His energy center was destroyed. The intense pain caused Jiang Yuqing's vision to turn white. He almost fainted. The force that he had used all kinds of methods to store began to run wildly because he lost control. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Before anyone could react, Jiang Yuqing was already lying on the ground, covered in blood and in a sorry state. A fist-sized bloody hole appeared in his lower abdomen. The muscles all over his body had also cracked to varying degrees due to the impact of the force in his body. Bloody scars covered his body, looking extremely terrifying. Jiang Yuqing was already unconscious. Blood splattered into his eyes, making his vision blood red. He lay on the ground, unable to tell which part of his body hurt more. So, it really was her. From then on, no, perhaps even before that, she had already planned all of this. The transparent flame quickly spread around Jiang Yuqing's body. Chu Liyue looked down at him and tilted her head. How does this feel? They should also experience the bone-piercing pain that she had experienced back then. Jiang Yuqing wanted to use his force to form a barrier to defend against the attack of the transparent flame. However, this fire seed had been hiding in his body for a long time and had directly erupted from the inside out. How could he defend against it? In addition to the damage to his core of essence, he was no different from a cripple now. Jiang Lizhuo watched this scene from the side, his heart aching to the extreme. But just now, everyone had clearly seen that it was Jiang Yuqing who took the initiative to attack the Empress concubine. In this situation, even death could not wipe out his crimes. How could he dare to plead for leniency or say another word? Jiang Lizhuo was in a daze. Thinking that the entire Jiang family would be completely finished from now on, his heart was filled with grief. His blood and qi churned, and his eyes rolled back as he fainted. The black cavalry immediately came forward and brought him away. The scene in front of him was extremely chaotic, but to a certain extent, it was also orderly. Anyone with discerning eyes could see that the Empress concubine's people had already made complete preparations. Everything that happened today was under her control. Jiang Yuqing rolled on the ground in agony, trying to extinguish the flames on his body. But how could the karmic fire consecrated in the heavenly square cauldron be so easily extinguished? Jiang Yuqing could even hear the sizzling sounds coming from the blood stains on his body as they burned. His skin, flesh, blood, and bones were all being tortured horribly. Finally, Jiang Yuqing spat out a few words with difficulty. If you want to kill me, just do it. Chu Liyue suddenly waved her hand. The transparent flame seemed to have received some kind of order and quickly gathered, finally forming a small ball. Then it rose into the air and jumped onto Chu Liyue's palm. If one didn't look carefully, it was really hard to recognize the transparent flame that jumped like a fairy. Then Chu Liyue raised her sword and with a flick of the sword, she cut a bloody wound on Jiang Yuqing's chest. Without waiting for Jiang Yuqing to react, she flicked her finger and planted the flame into Jiang Yuqing's heart. Don't worry, I can't bear to kill you now. Chu Liyue curved her lips into a smile. In the future, with this flame accompanying you, you shouldn't be lonely. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. It turns out that the princess died back then because Xuanhuan and Jiang Yuqing colluded to frame her. They were the reason why the emperor was unconscious for 2 years. Jiang Yuqing was the mastermind behind the destruction of the Chongshu pavilion overnight. More importantly, the crown princess didn't die. After exposing the crimes they had committed back then, the situation in the entire Tianling dynasty changed drastically. The Xiahou residents and Jiang residents were executed. Xuanhuan and Jianghu's cultivation bases were crippled, their bones broken, and they were imprisoned. The deputy general of the Black Cavalry, Mu Qinghe, was demoted and placed under house arrest in the Mu residence. Other than that, many people were implicated and were completely dealt with together. It could be said that after this battle, half of the Tianling imperial court was bathed in blood. On the same day, the crown princess was officially registered as the empress. Overnight, the situation in the Tianling dynasty changed. Because of these things, the outside world was in an uproar. However, because the crown princess had an extremely high prestige in the Tianling dynasty, after knowing the truth, everyone quickly chose to accept it. In fact, most people thought that the crown princess was much better than xuanhuan to be able to return and ascend to the throne. However, they didn't expect that Chu Luiyue was actually the crown princess. Because of this, it wasn't that no one questioned her bloodline, but because Taizu had already appeared, no one dared to say anything. The entire Tianling dynasty was created by Taizu, so who dared to refute his words? Therefore, after a lot of trouble, there weren't any objections, and all kinds of disputes quickly subsided. As for the matter of xuanhuan and Jianghu colluding to harm the crown princess, it attracted many people's reprimand and insults. Of course, xuanhuan and Jianghu wouldn't know about this. Xuanhuan was placed under house arrest in Huayang Palace, and Jianghu, after seeing the Jiang family being executed with his own eyes the next day, he was also detained in Huayang Palace, but he didn't live in the same room as xuanhuan. After all, they were husband and wife. Chu Luiyue felt that it wasn't good to break them up. It was quite good to become a pair of distressed mandarin ducks. The handling of the various people in the palace took a full 3 days. The thick smell of blood was everywhere, and it didn't completely dissipate until a few days later. However, Chu Luiyue left these matters to the 13yu palace, and she quickly took over many of the matters in the imperial court. Because the changes were too big and involved a lot of people, there were many things that she needed to deal with personally. Fortunately, she was used to doing these things in the past, so it wasn't difficult for her to get started now. Soon she tidied up everything. On this day, she finally heaved a sigh of relief after reviewing the last bit of memorials. Just as she was about to go out, she happened to see Xuanhuan pacing back and forth outside the door, as if he was hesitating about something. "Father, why are you here?" Xuanhuan turned around when he heard the voice. After a few days of rest, Xuanhuan's complexion was much better. However, he seemed to be a little hesitant. "That, Imperial Father has something to ask you." "Father, just say it." Chu Luiyue smiled. What's the matter that made Father react like this? Logically speaking, he shouldn't have anything to worry about now. Xuanhuan coughed and carefully glanced at Chu Luiyue. He hesitated for a moment before he finally asked. After hesitating for a while, he finally said, "This? I heard that you already has a fiancé in country Yaoqin?" Digression, a crippled February floated by. Update at 6:00 p.m. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 903. Chu Luiyue didn't expect her father to come here for this matter. She couldn't help but smile and nod. Yes. Where did Imperial Father hear this news? Xuanhuan didn't expect her to admit it so frankly. He was slightly surprised. "Oh, I happened to have a chat with Elder Song the day before." Everyone in the Chongshu pavilion knew of Rongxiu's existence. After all, they had visited him in person and given him a lot of gifts. It was difficult to forget. Chu Luiyue had been busy dealing with the affairs of the imperial court these days and hadn't had time to have a good chat with Yuqi Song and the others. She didn't intend to hide it, so she nodded. "I see. I didn't want to hide this from you, but I've been too busy recently, so I didn't have time to tell you." Xuanhuan felt a little relieved. Looking at his daughter's frankness, it should be okay. "Then, how is he? I heard that he is the Prince of Yaoqin called Rongxiu, right? How old is he this year? How is his cultivation? Most importantly, how does he treat you?" Xuanhuan couldn't hold back and asked all the questions in his heart. Chu Luiyue glanced at him faintly. "Father, you didn't come here today to see me but to ask about Rongxiu, right?" Xuanhuan was embarrassed for a moment when his thoughts were exposed. However, this was related to his favorite daughter's marriage after all, so he was naturally cautious. "Ahem. You can say that. After all, he is your fiancé, but I haven't even seen him yet." With Jianghu as an example, Xuanhuan was now like a frightened bird. He was afraid that Chu Luiyue would encounter a bad person again. What happened 2 years ago, he didn't want it to happen again. Chu Luiyue saw that although he pretended to be calm, his eyes were full of nervousness and worry. How could she not know what he was thinking? She felt a little warm in her heart. Her red lips curled up and she nodded seriously. He is very good and he treats me very well. Xuanhuan carefully observed her expression. When she mentioned Rongxiu, she looked calm, her eyes were bright, and there was a spring breeze between her eyebrows. That was clearly the expression of someone who liked someone very much. He had never seen such an expression on her face before. Even in the past, when she took the initiative to come and say that she wanted to set up a marriage contract with Jianghu, he didn't. After all, Xuanhuan had lived for half his life, and as an emperor he was very good at guessing people's hearts. With one look I can tell that my precious daughter has feelings for Rongxiu. Xuanhuan breathed a sigh of relief in his heart, but there was also a faint trace of worry. On one hand he had always been worried that after experiencing the double betrayal of Jianghu and xuanhuan, Yuer's mental defense would greatly increase and she would reject everyone. On the other hand he was also afraid that this Rongxiu might not be able to give Yuer the best happiness. She had already suffered too much. He didn't want her to suffer even a little more pain. In that case, now that many things in West Hill have been solved, why don't we find a time to invite him to West Hill? Chu Luiyue raised his eyebrows slightly. It was normal for his father to want to see his son-in-law. After all, it was not the first time he had been here. Now that the dust had settled, it was time for her to tell him her true identity. Hearing Chu Luiyue's words, Xuanhuan nodded, but still seemed to be a little hesitant. Chu Luiyue came closer with some doubts. Father, what else do you want to ask? Xuanhuan immediately denied. No. Chu Luiyue looked at him lazily, with a face full of understanding. Xuanhuan was a little embarrassed. After hesitating for a while, he asked in a low voice, in fact it's not a big deal, but I just heard that Rongxiu doesn't seem to be in good health. Chu Luiyue almost burst out laughing. You haven't been here for a few days. Have you secretly investigated Rongxiu's background? Xuanhuan was exposed in front of him and he was embarrassed and blushed. I'm also worried about you, so I asked in private. Country Yaochen was far away from heaven's canopy, but Xuanhuan could still inquire about some relevant information. However, what he heard didn't make him feel at ease. Everything else was fine, but his physique seemed to be a disease in his mother's womb, and he had never been in good health. Xuanhuan couldn't help but feel worried. Chu Luiyue finally couldn't help but laugh and his eyes curved. Don't worry, his talent and cultivation are not inferior to mine. In fact, he is even stronger than mine. Everything else was just a rumor. Xuanhuan was shocked at first, but then he frowned slightly and didn't seem to believe it. Even if you want to speak up for him, you don't have to be so exaggerated. Even in the entire West Hill, there might not be anyone more outstanding than you, let alone Country Yaochen. It wasn't that he looked down on Country Yaochen, but compared to the Tianling dynasty, it was indeed very small. Chu Luiyue shook his head and said sincerely, if you don't believe me you will naturally know when he comes. In fact, she and Rongxiu did have some unknown issues between them. For example, her identity as the crown princess, and his identity as the son of God. Seeing how confident Chu Luiyue was, Xuanhuan was skeptical, but he still nodded in agreement. Don't worry. As long as he is as outstanding as you say, I will definitely support you. As for the rest, you don't have to worry about it. Chu Luiyue narrowed his eyes. Rest? What rest? Xuanhuan's eyelids twitched and he said vaguely, no, nothing, just. You see, now that you have returned safely and directly become the emperor, the courtiers are quite concerned about your marriage. Xuanhuan glanced at her carefully. You also know that many young talents in West Hill City are. Lord Zhao's second son hasn't married because of you? And the Sun family has been asking to see you for a few days? Chu Luiyue's eyes twitched fiercely. What the hell is going on? I haven't even settled down on the throne, and they are already putting my marriage on the agenda? But there's no need to be so anxious. How can there be no hurry? There are so many emperors in the Tianling dynasty, and most of them were already married when they ascended to the throne. Some of them were married on the day they ascended to the throne, and the worst ones were also engaged. Only you. Now that you are engaged they don't know much about it, but even if they know. Xuanhuan didn't finish his words, but Chu Luiyue knew what he meant. Even if they knew that she was engaged to Rongxiu, they probably wouldn't like her. Born in a small empire outside heaven's canopy, even if he was a prince in their eyes, he was definitely not worthy of Chu Luiyue, who was now the emperor of Tianling. At the same time, in the Pingliang Square outside West Hill City, a tall figure had just walked out of the transmission array. He was wearing a hood and his face was hidden so no one could see him clearly. There were people coming and going around, but not many people paid attention to him. He looked up at the majestic and quaint West Hill city in front of him and suddenly sneezed. Rongxiu rubbed his nose and murmured in a low voice. His nasal voice sounded particularly lazy. Who is scolding me? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 904. Chu Luiyue, who was still in the palace, did not know about the news of Rongxiu's arrival in the West Hill. After comforting her father with great difficulty, she went straight to the Huayang Palace. The once bustling Huayang Palace was now deserted. Apart from the black cavalry who were strictly guarding the inside and outside, there was not even a palace servant to serve. Chu Luiyue walked straight into the main hall of the Huayang Palace. After entering the room, she was hit by an unpleasant smell. The whole room was a mess and extremely dirty. And in the pile of rubbish she could barely see a person lying down. It was xuanhuan. Because there was no one to take care of her injuries, they repeatedly festered and festered. But every day, Qihan would specially come over and feed her an elixir to keep her alive. In this way she could not die or fall into a coma. She could only bear this terrible torture with a clear mind. There was no distinction between day and night, and there was no end to it. Hearing the sound, xuanhuan thought that Qihan had come, and she did not move. Anyway, she did not have the strength to struggle. She could only live like this every day. After these few days of torment, she no longer had any thoughts in her heart. Her only thought was that she would be lucky one day and die directly. Looks like you're doing well. A familiar voice sounded. Xuanhuan was shocked. She looked up in horror and realized that the person who came was actually Chu Luiyue. Today she was wearing a simple and elegant white dress. Her black hair was like clouds, and she only wore a peach blossom hairpin on her head. At a glance, she looked pure and noble. She was lovely and moving. Who would have thought that such a person would use such cruel means to force her, Xuanhuan, into such a hopeless situation? The surrounding filth seemed to have nothing to do with her. She stood there as if she was high and mighty. Xuanhuan knew that she was back. She was really back. What are you doing here? Xuanhuan struggled to spit out a sentence, but it was weak. Chu Luiyue smiled faintly. This consort is here to ask you, who exactly was the soul that escaped that day? What was its relationship with you, and how much did it help you? Xuanhuan was silent for a while. I can tell you, but if I do, you have to promise me that you'll kill me. She really couldn't continue living like this. Chu Luiyue raised her brows, and a smile appeared in her eyes. Do you think you still have the qualifications to negotiate with me? If you want to say it, then say it. If you don't want to say it, I have plenty of time to wait. After saying that, she turned around as if intending to leave just like that. Seeing how straightforward she was, Xuanhuan also panicked. Wait, I'll talk. I'll tell you now. As if she was afraid that Chu Luiyue would go back on his word, she took a deep breath and said everything she wanted to say. I also don't know when that person appeared in my body. I also don't know who he is. All these years, he was the one who instigated me to do those things. Back then, he was also the one who hinted to me to harm you. And the method to repair your Yuan meridian? Chu Luiyue narrowed his eyes and thought for a moment. Back then, when you attacked those people in Dahuang Swamp, he was the one who taught you? Yes. In that case, he was already hostile to me, so he manipulated you to do those things? That's right. If it wasn't for him, I definitely wouldn't have the guts. I swear. Chu Luiyue paused for a moment as many thoughts flashed through her mind. Seeing Xuanhuan like this, what she said should be true. She had deliberately locked her up and left her out for a few days to torture her. On one hand, she wanted her to repay the debt from back then. On the other hand, she wanted to push her to the brink of collapse so that she would tell the truth. At this point, there was no need for her to lie. It seemed that she wouldn't be able to get anything out of her in this regard. Chu Luiyue was a little disappointed. That person was very powerful. It was also within her expectations that Xuanhuan would be controlled by him. Perhaps she didn't know that person as well as the Taizu did. Was it your idea to attack me or Jiang Yuqing's? Chu Luiyue changed the question. It was his idea. He came to me of his own accord and said that he liked me and said that he wanted to be with me forever. Xuanhuan's voice gradually trembled as she spoke. She felt like a fool who had been played in the palm of Jiang Yuqing's hand without realizing it. Unfortunately, back then she had secretly given her heart to Jiang Yuqing. How could she tell the truth from a lie? When he came to me, he had already started to poison you. From the beginning to the end, the one who wanted to kill you was Jiang Yuqing. Although I hate you, I don't have the means or the guts to do it. Speaking of which, I'm just his assistant at best. If you want to take revenge, just go and find him. With that said, Xuanhuan laughed at herself. It's ridiculous to say that in his study, there is a portrait of you from 10 years ago. From the day you became of marriageable age, he liked you. But in the end, didn't he still try to kill you? Chu Luiyue didn't say anything. She couldn't bear Jiang Yuqing's so-called love. But as for why he did this, she was afraid that she would have to find him and ask him personally to know. Thinking of this, Chu Luiyue turned around and left. Xuanhuan hurriedly called out to her, wanting her to end herself, but Chu Luiyue's figure had already disappeared. In the end, Xuanhuan's voice was so hoarse that it almost bled. Gradually she fainted again. Not long after, Qihan came over and woke her up again. She had to endure the pain and torture that seemed to never stop. Chu Luiyue didn't care about everything that happened in the main hall. The 13th Yu had been by her side for a long time, so she naturally helped her take care of many things. After leaving the door, she turned around and entered the side hall. Jiang Yuqing was among them. His situation wasn't much better than Xuanhuan's. But his mental state was much better than Xuanhuan's. Hearing the sound, he slowly turned his head. Seeing that familiar yet strange face, his heart moved slightly, and a wave of emotion rose in his eyes. Chu Luiyue didn't dress up today, but after regaining her identity, she didn't hide her aura anymore, adding a bit of coldness and nobility. Even if she was only wearing a simple long dress, she was still so beautiful that people couldn't take their eyes off her. Jiang Yuqing didn't know if it was an illusion, but he vaguely felt that Chu Luiyue seemed to be more and more similar to the Xuanhuan Yu of the past. In the past, there were only 20% of her facial features and 30% of her expression, so there was a total of 50% similarity. But now, the girl's gradually opened appearance had 70% of the charm of the past. Especially when Xuanhuan Yu was the same age back then, it was as if they were carved out of the same mold. In this world, could there really be two people who looked so similar? Or was it because the core inside had changed so they were more similar? Chu Luiyue didn't know what he was thinking at this time, so she went straight to the point. I'm here today to ask you something. Did I ever tell you to cancel the engagement? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 905. Jiang Yuqing's pupils constricted, and a glimmer of light flashed across his eyes. After a moment he said, "No." Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. Actually, on the night she revealed her identity and officially ascended the throne, she had a very long dream. The entire dream was fragmented, with only a few incoherent fragments. After waking up, she had forgotten most of it, only vaguely remembering a few scenes. Other than the octagonal pavilion by the cliff that she had seen at the beginning, there were many unfamiliar scenes in the dream. She had never been to those places, but for some reason they felt very familiar. More importantly, she remembered the details of some of the scenes clearly. It was as if she had seen them before. After waking up, she tried to draw these scenes, but as soon as she picked up the brush, she almost completely forgot. She couldn't even draw a blurry outline. Other than the octagonal pavilion on the cliff, everything else became blurry. Other than that, the clearest was Thousand View Garden. She dreamed that she was standing by the lake and Jiang Yuqing was standing in front of her. She seemed to have said something and there were a few sensitive words. Engagement, cancellation, agreement. After waking up, Chu Luiyue thought for a long time. She felt that this dream wasn't completely a dream. There were many things in it that might be related to the part of her memories that she had lost. If all of that really happened before. I guess that I went to find Jiang Yuqing back then to cancel the marriage agreement. After waiting for a few days, she finally came here to see him and asked this question. But she didn't expect Jiang Yuqing to say that he didn't. Chu Luiyue didn't quite believe it. Really? Jiang Yuqing looked at her doubtful expression, and for some reason, a subtle smile suddenly appeared on his face. Now that things have come to this, why would I lie to you about such things? Back then she indeed didn't mention canceling the engagement. Because at that time, they had just agreed to pick a time to set the engagement, but before they could do it, she found him again and proposed canceling the engagement. Because she said that she had someone she liked. But in the end, the engagement was still set. But that was in the future. For her to ask such a question, it was obvious that she couldn't remember what had happened back then at all. Jiang Yuqing didn't intend to explain, nor was he interested in repeating what had happened back then. After all, in his opinion, those experiences weren't worth recalling or remembering. Chu Luiyue stared at Jiang Yuqing, repeatedly thinking about the truth of his words. Yesterday the Jiang family's residence was sealed. She suddenly changed the topic. Jiang Yuqing's face froze for a moment, but it was gone in the blink of an eye. Only a faint redness could be seen in his eyes. but his overall expression as if this matter had nothing to do with him. In fact, he had already expected all of this from the moment he was escorted to watch the beheading of the Jiang clan 2 days ago. Or rather, from the day he decided to make a move on her, he had thought of such a situation. However, in the past he had always been confident and thought that he would never fail. What was even more unexpected was that she actually came back alive. They all died because of you. Chu Luiyue looked at him. Your sister Jiang Yuji was still calling your name before she died. You should have heard it, right? The veins on Jiang Yuqing's forehead throbbed. Of course he heard it, and he heard it clearly. At that time blood flowed all over the ground. The originally lively lives were all gone in the blink of an eye, leaving behind a scene of devastation. Jiang Yuqing slowly closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the emotions in his eyes had completely dissipated, leaving only coldness. The winner is king and the loser is a bandit. This is your revenge on me. I'll just accept it. No matter how much he begged for mercy or tried to save himself, he was powerless to change the situation, usurping the throne and committing all kinds of crimes. Not to mention Chu Luiyue, anyone related to this would not let him off easily. Moreover, his pill of essence was shattered and he was covered in wounds. He was worse than an ordinary person. What else could he do except for anger and grief? However, all of this was actually useless. It would only cause him more pain. After becoming numb, he felt much better. Chu Luiyue smiled. Jiang Yuqing was rather open-minded. Or rather, he was cold and selfish enough. It was clearly because of him that thousands of people in the Jiang family were implicated. However, in the end he didn't seem to have any remorse. That was because he didn't care about those people at all. Even if they were his parents and his biological sister, he still cared about himself the most, even though he felt a little heartache for them. If someone else was involved in this matter, they would have committed suicide long ago because they couldn't bear the pressure of self-blame and guilt. However, Jiang Yuqing didn't. From this perspective, he was indeed someone important. If he didn't have some temperament and capabilities, how could he have made all the preparations silently back then and betrayed me in one fell swoop? I found this in your study room. Chu Luiyue suddenly took out a rectangular wooden box. As he was worried that the Jiang family might have left something dangerous behind, Qini also went with them during the search. After that, he sent this over. Upon seeing the wooden box, Jiang Yuqing's expression cracked for a moment. Chu Luiyue glanced at him, opened the wooden box and took out a painting. With a light flick of his wrist, the painting instantly unfurled. Chapter 906. In the face of Chu Luiyue's questioning, Jiang Yuqing chose to remain silent. His mouth was tightly shut and he refused to say anything. He even shifted his gaze and turned around, as if he didn't intend to continue chatting with Chu Luiyue. Snap. Chu Luiyue snapped her fingers. A cluster of crimson flames rose from between his fingers, and the painting was instantly set ablaze. Jiang Yuqing heard the commotion and suddenly turned around. When he saw this scene, the veins on his forehead throbbed fiercely. Since you refuse to speak, then there's no need to continue chatting. As for this painting, you should have burned it on the day you decided to kill this consort. Chu Luiyue's tone was cold and resolute. Seeing this painting would only make her feel more disgusted. Who was he pretending to be infatuated with her all these years? If he still had the slightest bit of sincerity, he wouldn't have done those things back then. Absurd, laughable. The painting was quickly devoured by the flames and finally turned to ashes. When the last bit of starlight was extinguished, Jiang Yuqing's face flickered for a moment. He seemed to want to snatch the painting, but in the end he didn't do anything. Chu Luiyue gave him a meaningful look, then turned and left. After her figure disappeared, the room once again regained its deathly silence. Not long after, there was a burst of mournful and tragic cries coming from the main hall next to them. A trace of disgust appeared on Jiang Yuqing's face. It was xuanhuan's cry, as if it was time for her to be tortured again. Almost every day there would be such a cry. Without looking, it wasn't hard to imagine what kind of terrible pain the owner of this voice was going through. Jiang Yuqing suddenly felt a burning pain in his heart. His face paled and he slowly bent over. After dealing with these matters, Chu Luiyue planned to return to Xiaoyu Hall first. Although her status was different from before, she still lived in her previous palace. Just as she reached the entrance of Xiaoyu Hall, she saw a familiar figure. Changwanzhou. He seemed to be waiting for her. When he heard her footsteps, he raised his head and looked over. Chu Luiyue was a little surprised and walked over. Xiaozhou, why are you back so soon? Previously, she had asked Changwanzhou to do her a favor, to return to country Yaochen and bring Chuning over. When she left Yaochen, Chuning only knew that she came to the Tianling dynasty with Mu Qinghe, but she didn't know that she came back for revenge. Naturally, she didn't know her true identity either. Now that the dust had settled, she planned to invite Chu Ning over for a reunion and tell him the truth. The previous Chu Luiyue was already dead, and the one living in this body had long been replaced by her. Even though it was too cruel for a father to say this, it was unavoidable. Now that she had regained her identity in Tianling, she could no longer pretend to be Chu Luiyue. She had already thought it through. As long as Chu Ning was willing, she would be his daughter for the rest of her life. Whether he wanted to stay in Xiling or return to Yaochen in the end, she would respect his choice and do her best to accompany and take care of him. After her rebirth, although she had only been with Chu Ning for less than a year, she had long regarded Chu Ning as her real father. Chu Luiyue only realized that Chang Wanzhou's expression was a little strange when she walked up to him. She suddenly felt a sense of unease. Then she heard Chang Wanzhou say, "Lord Chu Ning is missing." There was dead silence in the study of Xiaoyu Hall. Chu Luiyue sat at the head of the table while Chang Wanzhou stood 5 steps in front of her. The air was so cold that it seemed to be freezing inch by inch. "In that case, he was already missing when you arrived at the imperial capital of Yaochen?" Chang Wanzhou nodded. "Yes. I asked around, and they all said that Lord Chu Ning went to Tianling alone a month ago. They said that he received your letter. I heard that many people were envious. However, I went to Heaven's Canopy to check, and there was no trace of Lord Chu Ning." Although Chang Wanzhou had never seen Chu Ning before, Chu Luiyue had drawn a portrait for him long ago. As long as he saw him, he would definitely recognize him at a glance. Moreover, he was powerful and agile. He also had many trump cards. Even if he acted alone, Chu Luiyue could rest assured. She thought that everything was arranged properly, but she never expected that Chu Ning was no longer in Yaochen. "I never wrote a letter to father asking him to come to Xiling." Chu Luiyue's face was cold as if covered with a thin layer of frost. If this rumor was true, then who was the one who sent the letter to him? If this rumor was false, it would be even more troublesome. It meant that they didn't even know where Chu Ning went. The world was so big. Finding a person was like finding a needle in a haystack. Chu Luiyue frowned and her mind raced. "Call Xianhuan over." The moment Xianhuan entered the room, he felt that the atmosphere was a little strange. "Your Highness." He cupped his fists and bowed respectfully. Chu Luiyue didn't beat around the bush and asked directly, "Xianhuan, you've been in charge of the letters between father and I, right?" Xianhuan was stunned and immediately said, "Yes. Other than the first letter I wrote to father to tell him that I'm safe, I didn't write a second one. Has there been a letter from father?" Chu Luiyue paused and tapped her fingers on the table. According to the news that Xiao Zhou found out, father had already set off for West Hill a month ago because he received my letter. However, there was no trace of him until now. When Xianhuan heard this, he also realized the seriousness of the matter. He pondered carefully for a while. "There's no..." Just as he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something and his expression froze. Previously, Miss Mu's father and mother had written a letter, and this subordinate had passed it to young Master Jian. Is there anything written in that letter? Chu Luiyue thought for a moment, then got up and walked outside. Chu Luiyue was extremely fast and headed straight for Dragon Teeth Mountain. When she reached the foot of the mountain, the disciple on guard saw someone coming and was about to stop her when she took off her hood, revealing a gorgeous face. "Where's Jian Fengqi?" Chu Luiyue had been here before. In addition to the Wanzheng competition and the sect meeting, many people knew her. Recently, because of her shocking identity, everyone in Xiling was talking about her. They didn't expect her to suddenly appear here at this time. "Greetings, Your Highness." The two hurriedly bowed, but halfway through, they remembered that she was now an emperor and quickly changed their greetings. "Young master is on the mountain today. I'll take you there." "No need. I'll go personally," Chu Luiyue said and hurried up the mountain. When she was halfway up the mountain, she happened to meet Mu Hongyu. When she saw Chu Luiyue, Mu Hongyu was pleasantly surprised. "Luyu, why are you here?" She rushed over and was about to pounce on Chu Luiyue when she hurriedly stopped. She had almost forgotten that Luyu was no longer Luyu. Chu Luiyue grabbed her hand. "In the letter that your father and mother sent you, did they mention my father?" Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 907. Mu Hongyu was stunned. "I think it was mentioned. Wait a minute." As she spoke, she rummaged through her interspatial ring and took out a letter after a short while. She had always been very careful with the letters from Yaochen. "This letter was handed to me by young master a few days ago." As Mu Hongyu spoke, she handed the letter over. It only mentioned one sentence. Chu Luiyue opened the letter and skimmed through it. As expected, she saw a sentence at the end. It said that Chu Ning had received her letter and was planning to go to the West Hill to reunite with her. During that period of time, Mu Hongyu's parents had been staying in the capital. When they heard the news, they were very envious. They wanted to come and see Mu Hongyu, but after considering many factors, they couldn't go together. Chu Luiyue looked at the date. It was indeed a month ago. She frowned. The distance between the capital of Yaochen and the Tianling West Hill was more than tens of thousands of miles. Most importantly, there was also the heavens canopy. What kind of news did father receive to come to the West Hill so decisively? One had to know that with his strength, if no one led him, it would be impossible for him to find those teleportation arrays, let alone reach them safely. It was impossible for him not to understand these principles. But he still did it. Was it because he was confident or because someone had helped him, or was he coerced? So much time had passed. I wonder how father is doing. Seeing Chu Luiyue's grave expression, Mu Hongyu also sensed that something was wrong. What's wrong? Is there a problem with uncle? Chu Luiyue briefly explained the matter to her. Mu Hongyu said in surprise. You didn't ask him to come? I thought you really wrote a letter to invite him. When she received the letter, it was right after Chu Luiyue announced his identity. At that time, she was still shocked that Chu Luiyue was actually Xuanhuan, so when she saw the letter, she naturally thought that Chu Luiyue had already made preparations and planned to bring Chu Ning over after everything was settled. But now, it seemed that this was not the case at all. Chu Luiyue's hand gripped the letter tightly. His brows furrowed as his mind raced. It was obvious that someone had deliberately used her name to make a move on her father. But, who could it be? To be able to do this, the person must be someone from Heaven's Canopy. More importantly, the person must know her very well. Otherwise, the other party would never have thought of making a move on his father's side. Why was the other party doing this? Threatening her? But until now, she didn't seem to have received any news. If she hadn't sent Chang Wanzhou to Yaochen this time, who knew when she would have found out about her father's disappearance? Why are you guys standing here? Just as the two of them fell silent, Jian Fengqi suddenly arrived. He waved the fan in his hand and walked over with a charming smile. However, his gaze fell on Chu Luiyue and sized her up carefully, as if he had never seen her before. When he got closer, he put away his fan, cupped his fists and bowed slightly. Greetings, Your Majesty. He really didn't expect that Xuanhuan wasn't dead back then and had even returned with another identity. No wonder he always felt that Chu Luiyue was very familiar. So it was her. Now that he saw her again, his mood was indeed very strange. Seeing that the two of them seemed a little serious, Chu Luiyue was still holding the letter he had given to Mu Hongyu. It seemed like something had happened? What's going on? Jian Fengqi's gaze quickly scanned the duo's faces as he asked. Chu Luiyue returned the letter to Mu Hongyu and briefly explained what had happened. Jian Fengqi gradually frowned and tapped his hand with the bone fan. After you returned to West Hill, you have indeed offended many people, but there shouldn't be many who would think of harming Lord Chu Ning, right? Although Chu Luiyue had now ascended the throne, Jian Fengqi had always been bold and unrestrained. He had always been used to being free and unrestrained in front of her, so his words were still as unrestrained as before. Chu Luiyue didn't mind and nodded slightly. I thought that there would be some clues in this letter, but the content of the letter was similar to the information that Chang Wanzhou had found out. There weren't any more clues. Don't you have any way to find Lord Chu Ning? Jian Fengqi asked curiously. Based on her usual prudence and intelligence, she should have been prepared for this. Moreover, when she left the imperial capital and went to West Hill, which was thousands of miles away, she should have been more careful in this regard. Chu Luiyue shook her head. It's too far away. She had indeed left something with Chu Ning so that it would be convenient for them to confirm each other's location and safety. However, the two of them were so far away now, how could they detect each other? Then the current solution is to try our best to find him. Jian Fengqi pondered for a moment. But I'm afraid this matter shouldn't be made public. To the current Chu Luiyue, this matter could be said to be both simple and difficult at the same time. Now that she had regained her identity and the entire Tianling was under her control, it wasn't difficult for her to send someone to find the whereabouts of a person. However, the key was that Chu Ning's identity was somewhat special. He was the biological father of Chu Luiyue's body. Chu Luiyue's identity was different from before. Moreover, Xuanhuan had regained consciousness and was living well in the palace. Thus, Chu Ning's existence became a little awkward. I've already sent someone to look for him in private, but the world is so big and without any clues, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Seeing her worried expression, Mu Hongyu couldn't help but pat her hand gently. Luyu, don't worry. Uncle is a good person and nothing will happen to him. Chu Luiyue sighed softly. I hope so. Jian Fengqi looked at the two of them overlapping hands at the side, and his eyes flickered slightly. Xuanhuan was indeed different from before. In the past, when she was the empress, although she was very amiable, she always carried a faint aura of alienation and nobility. Actually, it wasn't intentional. It was because she was too outstanding from the moment she was born, which caused her to have an indescribable sense of loneliness. Not to mention others, almost none of the children in the Tianling royal family were very close to her. Everyone subconsciously looked up to her, so naturally they distanced themselves from her. Perhaps it was because of this that she was so good to Xuanhuan, who was closer to her back then. Even Mu Qinghe later. After returning from the tribulation, her personality had obviously changed a little. She had the most trusted friends and many things that she didn't have before. She seemed to have become a lot more real. Thinking of this, Jian Fengqi hesitated for a moment before finally asking, Have you seen Mu Qinghe? Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. They were about to salute when Chu Luiyue waved his hand. Where's Mu Qinghe? One of the guards hurriedly said, Vice President Mu. He's been in the mansion all this time. Lord Shijing is also here. Previously, Chu Luiyue sent Shijing to escort Mu Qinghe back, and Shijing had been staying here since then. Mu Qinghe's cultivation hadn't been destroyed, and only people at Shijing's level could suppress him. Chu Luiyue nodded slightly and walked straight in. Jian Fengqi was struggling in his heart and didn't want to continue forward. Then he saw Chu Luiyue turn around and glance at him. Jian Fengqi's heart trembled and he finally followed him obediently. As soon as they entered the inner courtyard, Shijing heard the noise and came out directly. Your Highness. The 13 Yu guards were directly under Chu Luiyue, so although she was now in power, they were still used to calling her Your Highness. Chu Luiyue was very direct. I brought Hong Yao and young Master Jian to see Mu Qinghe. Jian Fengqi. Shijing glanced at Jian Fengqi in surprise. It was not strange for Her Highness and Hong Yao to come, but what did it have to do with Jian Fengqi? But he didn't ask much. Mu Qinghe is now in the training field in the backyard. Although Mu Qinghe was imprisoned in Mu Mansion and was not allowed to go out, she was relatively free here. Anyway, barriers and Xian formations had already been set up outside, so Mu Qinghe couldn't escape. When they came to the training field, Chu Luiyue saw Mu Qinghe practicing swordsmanship on the empty training field at a glance. Hearing the sound, he stopped and looked back. When he saw Chu Luiyue, a trace of fluctuation flashed in his eyes, but he quickly calmed down and returned to his usual indifferent calmness. Hong Yao flapped its wings and flew out. It hesitated in front of Chu Luiyue, looking at Mu Qinghe and then at Chu Luiyue. It looked very pitiful. Chu Luiyue couldn't help but laugh. Okay, she's your master after all. Go if you want to. When Hong Yao heard this, it happily rubbed itself against her face and then flew towards Mu Qinghe. Mu Qinghe only saw a blue shadow coming straight to her, and a moment of hesitation appeared on her face. Now that Hong Yao could follow her, it couldn't be better. If she had an intimate relationship with him, it didn't seem too good. However, Hong Yao had been very worried about her these days. At this time it finally saw her, so it rushed straight to her. How could it care about anything else? It directly bumped into Mu Qinghe's arms. Mu Qinghe had no choice but to catch it and pat its head gently. Hong Yao's eyes were red and it almost cried again, but fortunately it stopped in time. Mu Qinghe glanced at it with a complicated look. Chu Luiyue asked him to stay in the name of Hong Yao. Of course it was just a superficial excuse. She would never let go of anyone who betrayed her easily. Logically speaking, he should have been killed on the same day. However, no. She spared his life and didn't even give him any punishment. She just put him under house arrest in Mu Mansion. And here, except for the fact that he couldn't move freely and the people around him no longer obeyed his orders, everything else seemed to be the same as before. He vaguely guessed Chu Luiyue's plan, but she didn't come after waiting for several days. Until today. Moreover, she brought Jian Fengqi with her. Mu Qinghe's gaze stopped on Jian Fengqi for a moment. Jian Fengqi instantly felt that there was a dagger at his back, and he couldn't wait to run away. He had always been thick-skinned and rarely felt like this. He only felt that every minute and every second of staying here was very unbearable. He really didn't bring Chu Luiyue here on purpose. I left West Hill for 2 years. Chu Luiyue said lightly. In West Hill City things have changed. I came here today to ask, when did the two of you become so close to each other? Back then, because Jian Fengqi was too presumptuous and flamboyant, Mu Qinghe had a lot of conflicts with him. Now, in the blink of an eye, the two of them seemed to have turned from enemies to friends. She really didn't believe that there was nothing going on here. Asked Chu Liwei with a smile as she sat down on a chair at the side. Qinghe, you go first. Digression. The fifth update is a little late, but it was released before 1 p.m. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Most of the people around were still talking about her. Rong Xiu walked forward and listened to the discussions of the people around him. Every time he heard those people's exclamations of surprise and admiration, his thin scarlet lips would curl slightly. She could always do what she wanted to do. It wasn't that he didn't want to come and help, but in the end he still felt that it was better for her to give it her all. It was best for her to take back what she had lost. It was best for her to take revenge on her own. Only then could she completely wash away all the pain she had suffered. As for him, all he had to do was pass the knife to her whenever she needed it. Of course, the knife had to be fast enough. Just as he was thinking of this, he suddenly felt his surroundings darken. He raised his head to take a look and found that the sky that was previously clear and boundless was now suddenly filled with dark clouds and darkening. Soon, raindrops fell from his forehead. It was cold. He was walking in the direction of the 100 Herbs building, but he didn't expect that the weather would change halfway. The rain soon became heavier. The peddlers packed up and left one after another. White mist gradually appeared on the blue stone. There was only a curtain of rain between heaven and earth. Rong Xiu frowned slightly, and there was a deep look in his eyes. Then he turned around and walked in another direction. The tall figure of the man quickly disappeared in the rain. After Chu Liwei walked out of the Mu mansion alone, she walked aimlessly on the street. In her mind she kept recalling what Mu Qinghe said just now. He admitted it. He said that he did it. What else did he say? All right, he said that he was originally Jiang Yuqing's man. So, his betrayal was actually not a betrayal. It turned out that the truth was like this. Countless scenes flashed before her eyes. Chu Liwei took a deep breath. The wind gradually rose and the surrounding sky quickly darkened. She glanced up at him. It was stuffy, gloomy, and cold. She had already forgotten what kind of expression she had after hearing those words, and what kind of answer she gave. She didn't even know how she walked out of the Mu mansion. Suddenly she felt a furry touch. It was Dumpling squatting on her shoulder, gently rubbing her face. Chu Liwei shook her head. Dumpling, don't worry. I'm fine. She probably left hope for herself thinking, but in this world there weren't so many thinking. Chu Liwei looked at the sky and there was rain dripping. In the blink of an eye, it sped up, connecting the sky and the earth into lines. Chu Liwei moved and was about to go back, but she suddenly felt a cold aura rushing toward her from the distance in the rain. She suddenly looked up. Alarm bells rang in her heart. A bluish-purple ball of light broke through the air. It was heading straight for her face. She staggered her feet and was about to make a move when she suddenly felt someone approaching her from behind quickly and grabbing her waist. At the same time, a silver blade of light flew out. It collided with the ball of light. It was as if a transparent barrier had appeared around him, and all the fluctuations were blocked outside. An extremely familiar cold fragrance hit her, and Chu Liue's heart suddenly beat faster. She turned around and saw that the person who came had a noble appearance and an astonishing aura. It was Rong Xiu. Rong Xiu? Why are you here? Chu Liue widened her eyes slightly. Rong Xiu hugged her tighter, and his other hand held a black umbrella. His voice was low and lazy. It's raining. I'm here to hold the umbrella for you. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 9-10. Her heart, which had been empty, seemed to be filled with something in an instant. Chu Liue subconsciously hugged his lean waist tightly and pressed her face against his chest. Listening to his strong heartbeat, it seemed to make the almost frozen blood in her body flow again. The heavy rain fell and the cold wind blew everywhere. Countless ripples on the ground intertwined. Under the dark sky, only the two of them who were tightly leaning against each other could be seen. With a burst of eardrums, Chu Liue felt that her drifting thoughts were finally pulled back. Her numb limbs gradually regained their warmth, and the countless illusions in front of her disappeared little by little. Only Rong Xiu was left. Hugging and leaning on each other, it was so real. The black umbrella above her head stood up, as if it was blocking out all the wind and rain. His broad and warm embrace made her yearn for it. Chu Liue was in a daze. After a while she said in a low voice, Rongxiu, I miss you so much. Rongxiu frowned slightly. There was something wrong with her voice. She had always been smart, independent, and strong. No matter what kind of situation she encountered, she never seemed to panic. Even after experiencing such a betrayal, she still relied on her own strength to return all the pain she had suffered and take back everything that belonged to her. She seemed to be invincible. But in this world, how could any flesh and blood not know pain and suffering? It was just that someone was better at hiding it. He leaned closer, and his jade-like chin gently rested on her head. I'm here, don't be afraid. It was a simple sentence, but it was his most cherished promise. Chu Liyue's eyes suddenly became hot. Even if she was homeless and miserable, even if she was full of twists and turns, there would always be one person in this world who would appear and accompany her when she needed him most. He gave her courage and love. That was enough. She closed her eyes, dispersing the last bit of disappointment and regret in her heart. Anyway, it was not like she had not experienced a deeper blow. Now this was nothing. At the very least, the current situation was still under her control. Bang! The sound of something exploding came from behind. Chu Liyue looked up from Rongxiu's arms and glanced back. She saw that the purplish-blue ball of light that was flying towards her had completely dissipated after colliding with Rongxiu's power. At this moment, there was only something left that fell into the water. Pitter-patter, splashing a few drops of rainwater. Chu Liyue looked over and vaguely saw that it was a thumb-sized object. It was glowing faintly in the water, but he couldn't see it clearly. What's that? Chu Liyue asked curiously. Just now, she had clearly sensed that this thing was coming for her. The aura he felt at that moment was very unfamiliar. She thought for a moment, but she couldn't figure out who would do such a thing. It's just a small toy, Rongxiu said lightly. Chu Liyue didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that Rongxiu seemed to have recognized the origin of that thing, and there was a hint of coldness in his tone. Chu Liyue gave Dumpling a look. Dumpling flew out and picked up the thing. Rongxiu glanced at Dumpling, his eyes cold. Dumpling shuddered. Its strong desire to live made its wings tremble slightly, and it almost threw the thing out. Withstanding the huge pressure, it finally handed the thing to Chu Liyue. Chu Liyue stretched out her hand and was about to receive it when Rongxiu, who was beside her, grabbed her hand. At the same time, a force flew out and hit the item. Bang! With a crisp sound, the thing cracked open. Then, a piece of paper flew out and unfolded automatically. It seemed to be a piece of white rice paper that was casually cut, but it floated in mid-air and didn't get stained by the raindrops at all. It was as if there was an invisible barrier around it. There were only 2 lines of words on that piece of paper. The first line was, "Xuanhuan, congratulations." The second line was, "Your father is doing very well at Ai's place, don't miss him. We will meet again in a month's time." Just as Chu Liyue finished reading, that piece of paper quickly combusted and turned into ashes, disappearing without a trace. Other than the faint smell of burning that filled the air, it was as if nothing had happened. But Chu Liyue suddenly opened her eyes wide, and her heart was filled with shock. Because she had seen the handwriting on that piece of paper before. Back then she had received a letter from Heaven's Canopy, and that letter had half a Xian formation as a seal. She had drawn the remaining half of the Xian formation before opening the letter. And that letter had written, "Xuanhuan, long time no see." At that time she hadn't told anyone about her identity, so after receiving that letter she had thought about it for a long time, but she couldn't figure out who wrote the letter. After coming to Xiling, she had been busy with various things and had forgotten about this matter for a while. Until today, when she saw that piece of paper again, it must have been written by the same person, and the other party had obviously known about her identity a long time ago. It was even possible that the other party knew everything about her like the back of their hand. Needless to say, this "congratulations" was referring to her ascension to the throne. And her father was also deliberately taken away by the other party. Chu Liyue frowned. This person, who exactly was it? At first she thought that it was someone from the Tianling dynasty, but now it seemed that it wasn't the case. To be able to call himself I, and have such means, it was very likely that he came from outside the Tianling dynasty. Rongxiu narrowed his eyes, and a cold glint flashed across the corner of his eyes. She was really haunting him. Chu Liyue suddenly turned her head and looked at Rongxiu. "You know who this is?" She had an inexplicable intuition that Rongxiu seemed to know more than she expected. She didn't know where this feeling came from, but judging from Rongxiu's reaction just now, it seemed that her guess was right. Rongxiu's thin red lips moved slightly. Just as he was about to speak, a shout came from the corner of the street behind them. "Your Highness." It was 13's voice. Chu Luiyue turned around and saw a slender young man running toward them quickly. His movements were nimble and free. It seemed that he didn't move much, but he was already in front of them. 13 came in the rain, but he was surrounded by a layer of enchantment, so he wasn't worried about getting wet. Because he was still young, Chu Luiyue almost never assigned tasks to 13. She only let him focus on cultivation. This also allowed 13 to come and go freely both inside and outside the palace. Today he happened to meet Xuanhuan. When he heard that it was related to his master, he immediately agreed and left the palace to look for him. When he was still a short distance away from Chu Luiyue, 13 shouted excitedly, "Your Highness, the retired emperor was worried that you would be out alone for too long, so he asked me to send you an umbrella and take you back to the palace." Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 9:11. Suddenly 13's voice stopped abruptly, and he stopped in his tracks. He looked at the scene in front of him in shock. Someone was holding an umbrella for Her Highness. More importantly, he was hugging Her Highness. With such an intimate gesture, anyone could tell that the relationship between the two was not ordinary. You. Who are you? 13 had come happily to bring Chu Luiyue back to the palace, but when he saw this scene he felt uncomfortable. Without waiting for Chu Luiyue to speak, Xiao raised his eyebrows and said calmly, "I'm yours, fiancé." 13's eyes widened in shock and his mouth dropped open. You. You're Her Highness's fiancé? Didn't Her Highness just settle jianghu and xuanhuan? How did she suddenly have a fiancé? Because 13 was young, no one told him about this, so he was especially shocked at first glance. Chu Luiyue was thinking, what did 13 say just now? He seemed to have mentioned the retired emperor? Based on Xiao's intelligence, he would have sensed something wrong with this sentence and guessed her identity. You said just now, who asked you to bring her back? Sure enough, Xiao spoke casually and directly. Chu Luiyue's eyebrows twitched. 13 was about to reply, but he saw that there was something wrong with Her Highness's eyes, so he covered his mouth. But, Xiao, I have something to tell you. Chu Luiyue originally wanted to find a suitable time to tell him everything, but she didn't expect that the moment the two of them met, she had no choice but to say it now. Xiao looked down at her. There was a trace of embarrassment on his face, but there was an undetectable trace of a smile at the corner of his lips. Was she embarrassed that she had not been honest with him about those things before? Xiao's voice was low. This low rhetorical question seemed to come from his chest, pressing tightly against his heart and brushing past his eardrums. It was pleasing to the ear and numbing. Chu Luiyue blushed slightly, but she held his hand gently and firmly, their fingers intertwined. Come with me. 6 Cloud Street. Chu Estate. The rain had just stopped, and in the quiet and leisurely courtyard, there was already a shallow accumulation of rainwater. Water droplets continuously dripped from the eaves and fell into it, creating a circle of ripples. The air after the rain was moist and sweet. 13 stood outside the door, waiting anxiously and impatiently. From time to time he would glance at the tightly shut door. Her Highness and that man had been in there for a long time and still hadn't come out. From His Highness's words, it seemed that he wanted to explain something to that man. However, His Highness was of noble birth and was decisive in killing. Since when did he need to explain so much to others? Most importantly, that man was actually Her Highness' fiancé. 13's somewhat nervous voice sounded. Your Highness? The rain has stopped for a long time. Should we go back to the palace? In fact, he didn't want to rush at this time, but there were still people waiting in the palace. Chu Luiyue's emotions gradually calmed down, and she pulled herself out of Xiao's arms. She almost forgot that 13 was still waiting outside. I wanted to talk to you about something, but it seems that I can't today. Xiao tidied her messy hair and gently rubbed her face. Chu Luiyue looked at him, and a white light suddenly flashed in her mind. She vaguely felt that Xiao seemed to want to talk to her about something important. And it was very likely that it was because of his previous identity as the Son of God. But 13 was already rushing her, and it was indeed not convenient for her to stay for too long. Chu Luiyue could only nod. Then you can stay here for the night. Tomorrow? She paused, raised her eyes slightly and glanced at Xiao again. Actually, Father mentioned to me before that. He said that he wanted to see you. Xiao understood and kissed her gently between her eyebrows. Then I'll visit father-in-law tomorrow. Chu Luiyue's face turned red, and then she was a little worried. Won't tomorrow be too soon? There should be some time to prepare for this kind of thing. Xiao narrowed his eyes and a smile flashed across his eyes. His wife didn't seem to have much confidence in her man. Then, in 3 days. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Taizu was the strongest expert of the Tianling dynasty in 1,000 years. If even he said so, then, just how strong were the people of the Black Demon Cave? That day, although that person didn't have a physical body and was only left with a soul, the aura of the Black Demon Cave was extremely strong. That's why I recognized it at a glance. These hidden sects were very strong in cultivation, and most of them had their own distinctive characteristics. As long as you've seen them, you'll be able to recognize them at a glance. But these people are usually very arrogant and rarely enter the world, let alone participate in the disputes between dynasties. Taizu shook his head, looking puzzled. I don't know what's going on this time, Chu Liwei pondered for a moment. That soul has been in Xuanhuan's body for a long time, at least a few years. According to what xuanhuan said, she herself doesn't know when that person came into existence. But many of the things she did later were because she was bewitched by that person. Including, the matter of killing me. Taizu looked at her with a complicated gaze. Actually, that day I've already sensed that that person seems to be targeting you. Do you know why? Chu Liyue's heart skipped a beat. She still remembered clearly what that person had said at that time. It seemed to be because of the water droplet in her body? Ever since this water droplet transformed into an existence similar to the pill of origin in her body, it had been in this form almost all the time. But that day, under the influence of that man, it transformed into the appearance of a transparent book page again, and faintly felt like it was struggling to be pulled out. But if that person came for this, then why did he target her so early on? Before she died in her previous life, she didn't have this thing on her. It was only after she had been reborn that such an item suddenly appeared in her body out of nowhere. Even now she still didn't know what it was. She shook her head. That person's attack failed, but he definitely won't give up. He'll come again in the future. Taizu said in a low voice. It's fine if he's alone, but if he implicates others. This was actually what he was most worried about. If the people of Black Demon Cave wanted to attack Tianling, even he might not be able to defeat them. Girl, the most important thing for you now is to improve your cultivation as soon as possible. This way, even if someone wants to trouble you in the future, you'll have the power to deal with it. Taizu frowned. You have too many treasures on you, and any one of them will attract the covetous eyes of countless people. You can hide it for a while, but you can't hide it forever. The only way and also the best way was to become stronger by himself. Chu Liwei nodded seriously. You, will remember Taizu's teachings. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Early in the morning, Chu Liwei got up and packed up, then went to the Xuanhu Palace. The Xuanhu Palace was Shangguan Yu's bedchamber. It was obvious that Shangguan Yu wanted to meet Rongxiu as Rongxiu's father by setting the venue here instead of the palace hall where the other officials would attend court. Although Shangguan Yu was now the emperor in Shangguan Yu's eyes, whether this marriage could make her happy was the most important thing. Perhaps in the eyes of the world, an emperor's marriage was a matter of state first, followed by family affairs. But in Shangguan Yu's eyes, it was a matter of family first, followed by state affairs. Everywhere she passed, the palace servants bowed respectfully. But just as she walked out of the Xuanhu Palace, she saw someone standing there as if waiting for someone. Hearing the movement, the person turned around. When he saw Chu Liyue's face, a trace of excitement and joy appeared on the handsome young man's face. He took 2 quick steps forward. Your Majesty. Chu Liyue looked at him strangely. Zhao Zicheng? Why are you here? This was the second son of the Zhao family, also a famous family in Xiling City. But he had left Xiling a few years ago, and she didn't expect him to come back today. Hearing her question, Zhao Zicheng's ears turned red. When I heard that your Majesty had returned, I rushed back day and night, hoping to see your Majesty. He seemed to be very nervous, but his face was full of hope and sincerity. Your Majesty, I'm here today to confess my feelings to you. Previously, because you chose Jiang Yuqing, I didn't say much and left Xiling. But this time, please give Zicheng a chance. The corner of Chu Liyue's eyes twitched. Is he confessing? On the day when I'm going to meet father with my fiancée? Digression, I suddenly found out that a friend of mine had a tumor, so I chatted with him for a long time. Everyone take care of your health and have regular checkups. I'll continue at 6. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 9:13. Zhao Zicheng didn't seem to notice anything wrong with Chu Liyue's expression and continued speaking. Because I know that your majesty has been busy recently, Zicheng has been staying in the residence these few days and didn't dare to disturb you. But Zhao Zicheng looked up and quickly glanced at the woman in front of him. His eyes were filled with unconcealable adoration, and his nervous heart was beating wildly. But, Zicheng has admired your majesty for many years. I'm afraid that if I don't say it this time, I won't have another chance in the future. Zhao Zicheng instantly felt much better after finally speaking his mind. However, his handsome face was stained with a tinge of red. His eyes were filled with hope and uneasiness as he looked at Chu Luiyue as if he was waiting for her answer. Chu Luiyue sighed inwardly. To be honest, Zhao Zicheng was very good. Although the Zhao family wasn't considered the top family in Xiling City, they were still officials of the Tianling dynasty for hundreds of years and had a deep foundation. As the second son of the Zhao family's direct descendant, Zhao Zicheng's status was even more precious. Most importantly, he was an extremely outstanding mystic master genius. In the entire Xiling except for Chu Luiyue, almost no one could be compared to him. If Jian Fengqi was a genius who was only one step behind her in alchemy, then Zhao Zicheng was above mystic master level and could fight with her. When she was young, she cultivated with many elders of the imperial family. Jian Fengqi and Zhao Zicheng had been her study companions for a period of time. Unlike Jian Fengqi's arrogant and unbridled personality, Zhao Zicheng was more like a modest gentleman with an introverted and gentle personality. For so many years, everyone in Xiling City praised the second son of the Zhao family when they mentioned him. Even compared to Jiang Yuqing, he was definitely on par in all aspects. Zhao Zicheng, I remember that you are already 27 this year. Chu Luiyue said. Zhao Zicheng was stunned for a moment and nodded in confusion. That's right. At this age, you should have married and had children long ago. Chu Luiyue said sincerely and calmly. You don't have to waste any more time on me. Zhao Zicheng's originally slightly red face turned white with a swish. A hint of panic flashed in his eyes. Your Majesty, what do you mean? Chu Luiyue shook his head. As smart as you are, there's no way you don't know what I mean. If that's the case, don't mention it again in the future. Please leave. With that, Chu Luiyue prepared to leave. Zhao Zicheng only hesitated for a moment before he immediately blocked her way again. Your Majesty, Zicheng is sincerely seeking your hand in marriage. Zhao Zicheng tried hard to suppress the nervousness and embarrassment in his heart. There wasn't a single spot that wasn't perfect. He was noble and unparalleled, but there was also a trace of demonic aura. Just by standing there, he could easily take away all the colors between heaven and earth. Even Zhao Zicheng had to admit that this person's appearance and aura was really something he had never seen before in his life. You are, Rongxio's thin scarlet lips curled into a faint smile. I am Yu's fiancé Rongxio. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 9:14. It was a simple sentence, but it was like a sudden clap of thunder. It smashed into Zhao Zicheng's heart. His mind went blank for a moment. What did you say? He was her fiancé. Didn't she just come back? When he looked back in shock, only to see the woman who had been distant and cold to him just now unconsciously smile after seeing the person who came. Thousands of stars seemed to shine in her eyes. At this moment, Zhao Zicheng's heart turned cold. Rongxio. Chu Luiyue didn't expect him to come so quickly and walked over. Why are you here so early? Rongxio raised his eyebrows slightly and smiled faintly. Since I want to meet my father-in-law, I naturally have to be early. Besides, if I came late, wouldn't I miss a good show? Chu Luiyue glared at him. How could he joke with her at this time? She had clearly rejected him just now. Rongxio looked at her angry and coquettish expression and smiled slightly. His heart itched slightly and he wanted to hug her directly. But when he thought that this was the Tianling palace and there were many palace servants around to serve them, he suppressed the urge and just held her hand. Seeing the two of them clasped hands, Zhao Zicheng finally reacted. He frowned subconsciously. Anyone could see that the two of them were very close. Fiancé, why hadn't he heard of it before? Zhao Zicheng had specially asked his father a few days ago to sound out Xuanhuan, but he didn't mention it at that time. Could it be someone she met in the past 2 years? If he remembered correctly, she had returned from an empire called Yao Qin outside Heaven's Canopy. This man? You don't seem to be from West Hill. Zhao Zicheng took a deep breath and tried to make himself look calm. Not to mention West Hill, even in the entire Tianling, there was no Rong family among the famous families. There was a high probability that it was from Yao Qin. Chu Luiyue didn't want to say too much to Zhao Zicheng, so she said, "Father should be waiting for me. Father should be waiting inside, so I'll go in with Rongxiu first. Second young master Zhao, you should go back too." Zhao Zicheng looked at Rongxiu insistently. "Since you're Her Majesty's fiancé, there's nothing you can't say about your family background, right?" He was going to go against Rongxiu. Rongxiu looked at Chu Luiyue comfortingly and smiled. "I'm 7th Prince Yao Chen Rongxiu." He was indeed from of Yao Chen's people. Of course. Of the ROF of course. Of the Tianling of the Tianling of the Emperor of the Emperors of his of. The difference in status between the two of them was too great. Not to mention him, even the officials of the imperial court wouldn't agree to this marriage. Zhao Zicheng couldn't help but look at Chu Luiyue. Of course she knew this, but she was still so insistent. It was enough to prove that she was truly moved by this man. Zhao Zicheng clenched his fists tightly, feeling extremely conflicted. In the early years it was Jiang Yuqing who was one step ahead. Now there was Rongxiu. It seemed that he was always a little short of success every time. He really couldn't take it lying down. "I am the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Zhao Zicheng." Although Zhao Zicheng hadn't stayed in West Hill for the past few years, he hadn't resigned from his position. His journey had been smooth, and he had already become an assistant minister at such a young age. But in fact, this title was not worth mentioning compared to his aristocratic background. There were several assistant ministers of the Ministry of Rights, but there was only one second young master of the Zhao family. Zhao Zicheng had no intention of using his background to suppress others. He only wanted to use his official position to try and pressure the other party. When ordinary people heard this, it was inevitable that they would be surprised and in admiration. But after he finished speaking, the man opposite him only nodded with an indifferent expression, as if he didn't care. "Second young master Zhao, I've heard of you." Chu Luiyue and Zhao Zicheng both looked at him in surprise. Chu Luiyue thought that Rongxiu had only been to West Hill once before, and Zhao Zicheng wasn't here at that time. How could he have heard of Zhao Zicheng's name? Zhao Zicheng thought to himself, "Judging from this Rongxiu's tone, he seems to know something about me, but why doesn't he care at all? Perhaps he doesn't know much about the situation in West Hill? If that's the case, it would explain his series of reactions." Zhao Zicheng took a deep breath. "I have a few words that I would like to talk to young Master Rong alone. Is it convenient for you?" Rongxiu raised his eyebrows and nodded. "Why not?" Seeing that the atmosphere was getting strange, Chu Luiyue grabbed Rongxiu. "If you have something to say it here. It's most likely related to me. Why can't I listen?" Zhao Zicheng looked at her hesitantly. "Your Majesty, Rongxiu and I are engaged. What can I not listen to? Second young Master Zhao, if you have something to say, please speak your mind." Rongxiu blinked and a faint smile flashed across his eyes. "Well, it's rare to see her supporting me like this. It feels good?" Zhao Zicheng's eyes dimmed for a moment. "Even Jiang Yuqing back then, she didn't seem to have spoken up for me like this. She's protecting me like this. It's obvious that she's really in love." On the other hand, Rongxiu was standing behind her, as if he was enjoying this woman's protection of him with a clear conscience. Zhao Zicheng suddenly became angry. "If it's already like this, won't it be worse in the future? This marriage is not worth it to me." Zhao Zicheng's expression became much more serious. "Since your Majesty has said so, I will not mince my words. Young Master Rong, if you are sincere to Her Majesty, then please leave her now and don't have anything to do with her anymore." As soon as he finished speaking, the atmosphere suddenly turned cold. The space around them seemed to freeze inch by inch. Chu Luiyue could clearly feel an extremely cold aura spreading from Rongxiu's body. For a moment, Zhao Zicheng felt an extremely dangerous killing intent. His heart suddenly skipped a beat. His hair stood on end. But in the blink of an eye, this feeling quickly disappeared without a trace. It was as if everything was just an illusion. Rongxiu smiled, but his voice was so cold that it made one's heart tremble. "What if I say no?" Zhao Zicheng knew that he would definitely not agree after hearing this, so he wasn't discouraged and continued speaking. "Perhaps you two were very close in the past, but now, as you can see, she is already the Tianling Emperor. She needs to marry someone of the same status, but you don't have this right. If you really like her and cherish her, then for her own good, you should cancel this marriage and leave. Don't tell me you don't know what self-awareness is?" Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. If you can defeat me from now on, I will never get involved in these matters again. Also from now on stay away from you, Rong Xiu reminded. Zhao Zicheng choked. All right. Hearing the answer, Rong Xiu nodded with satisfaction. Chu Luiyue glanced at Rong Xiu. This is, on purpose? Why do I feel that Rong Xiu deliberately induced Zhao Zicheng to say these words? Zhao Zicheng composed himself. In that case, let's make an appointment. Let's do it today. Before he finished speaking, a low and powerful voice came from not far away. They looked back and saw that Xuanhuan had already walked out of Yuanhe Hall. The words just now came from his mouth. Father. Chu Luiyue shouted. Rong Xiu cupped his fists and bowed to Xuanhuan. Rong Xiu greets your majesty. Zhao Zicheng didn't expect Xuanhuan to appear at this time. Thinking that he seemed to have heard everything just now, he was a little nervous and also bowed. Shock flashed across Xuanhuan's eyes as he sized Rong Xiu up, but there was also a tinge of admiration. He waited in Yuanhe Hall for a long time but no one came. Later, he heard from the palace servants that a few people were quarreling outside, so he planned to come out and take a look. At first glance he saw his baby Yu. Then, he turned his gaze and saw another man in white standing beside her. Seeing that the two were standing very close to each other, he had already guessed the identity of this person. Although he only saw the back of Rong Xiu just now, Xuanhuan could still vaguely sense the noble and imposing aura of Rong Xiu. He was a little surprised. Even the ordinary children of the aristocratic families couldn't compare to such an imposing manner. He had been sitting on the throne for a long time, so he had an excellent eye for people. Rong Xiu exuded a noble aura that only a person of high status would have. He had seen Emperor Yao Qin a few times, but he couldn't be compared to this person. He didn't seem like someone who could be raised by an existence like Emperor Yao Qin. So you're Rong Xiu. Standing close to him and sizing him up, Xuanhuan finally saw Rong Xiu's face clearly. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Isn't he too good-looking? Even he had to admit that he'd never seen such a peerlessly noble appearance that was like an immortal's in his life. Even Jiang Yuqing, who was famous for being the most handsome man in Xiling, paled in comparison to her instantly. In comparison, it was like a firefly competing with the sun and the moon. The contrast was simply tragic. With just one look, Xuanhuan immediately understood why his daughter liked him. With such a face, he was probably a young girl who was in love. Her heart would be moved at the sight of him. If he hadn't eavesdropped for a while just now and felt that this man was quite responsible and courageous, Xuanhuan almost suspected that his baby daughter was simply bewitched by this devilish face. Father, Rong Xiu and I were going to visit you, but we didn't expect to meet second young Master Zhao. We were delayed for a while. You won't be angry, right? Chu Luiyue blinked. Xuanhuan laughed. He knew that she was speaking up for Rong Xiu, but he felt inexplicably unhappy when he saw how protective she was of Rong Xiu. Do you think your father is such a petty person? Zhao Zicheng's heart skipped a beat when he heard that. So they had made an appointment long ago? Then wouldn't he? Thinking of this, Zhao Zicheng suddenly felt even more nervous. Xuanhuan looked at Zhao Zicheng and sighed in his heart. Although Zhao Zicheng was outstanding in all aspects, what could he do if you didn't like him? Back then, Zhao Zicheng left West Hill sadly because of the engagement between Yu and Jiang Yuqing. In fact, it wasn't that he didn't know. Now that Jiang Yuqing was defeated and imprisoned, Zhao Zicheng still had feelings for Yu and specially came to ask for her hand in marriage. There was nothing wrong with that. Unfortunately, he was still a step too late. Since you have made an appointment, there's no time like the present. Let's do it today. He also wanted to see how powerful Rong Xiu was. Yu had praised him before, but he still didn't quite believe it. Only when he saw it with his own eyes could he be sure. Coincidentally, there's a martial arts field behind Yuanhe Hall. Let's do it there. Since Xuanhuan had said so, the rest of the people naturally wouldn't object. Everyone began to walk into Yuanhe Hall. Chu Luiyue pulled Rong Xiu's sleeve and whispered, Rong Xiu, when did you cultivate as a Xian master? Zhao Zicheng is very talented in this aspect. Can you do it? Mobile users, please browse for a more high-quality reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 9:16. When Rong Xiu heard this, his footsteps paused slightly. He glanced at her and raised his eyebrows slightly. A faint light flashed across his deep phoenix eyes. For some reason, Chu Luiyue suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. It was extremely dangerous. He didn't open his mouth, but a voice as weak as a fly clearly entered her ears. Don't say such things in the future. Chu Luiyue blinked and vaguely felt that she had committed a huge taboo. What did I just say? Put your heart back in your stomach. Rong Xiu gave his wife a warning look. Your man is very good at everything. Chu Liyue's face heated up slightly and her ears burned a little. She immediately looked away and followed the crowd forward. TSK, wasn't she also worried about him? After all, they had known each other for so long, but she still didn't know that Rong Xiu was actually a mystic cultivator. Although she knew that Rong Xiu was very strong in the past, she had always thought that he was only a martial artist. Now that she was going to compete with Zhao Zicheng as a mystic cultivator, she really didn't have any confidence. Zhao Zicheng's talent in this aspect was only slightly weaker than hers. After so many years of diligent cultivation, it wasn't hard to imagine how powerful his cultivation had become as a mystic cultivator. Rong Xiu was actually so calm. However, a certain someone who had been warned by Yanjing naturally didn't dare to ask any more questions. Since he had such a reaction, he should have some confidence. Seeing Rong Xiu's calm and confident appearance as if he didn't take this matter seriously, Chu Liyue, who was originally a little worried, gradually relaxed. This man seemed to have never needed her to worry about. Xuanhuan Hall, martial arts training field in the backyard. Rong Xiu and Zhao Zicheng stood facing each other. Shengguan Yu and Chu Liyue sat below the field. Around them stood the black cavalry who were in charge of guarding. It was quiet all around. Everyone's gaze was focused on the two people on the field. Some were curious while others were doubtful. Now, everyone here already knew that the man in white, Rong Xiu, was Her Majesty's fiancé. Since Zhao Zicheng failed to marry Her Majesty, the two of them decided to compete. Since this matter involved Chu Liyue, it would naturally cause a huge commotion. At this moment, although everyone looked very calm on the surface, their hearts were already surging with waves. Outside the palace gates in the distance, some palace servants were huddled together, cautiously looking in this direction. I heard that the man in white was Her Majesty's fiancé in country Yaochen. I think he's the 7th prince of country Yaochen. Yaochen? Isn't that a vassal state of Tianling? Even though he is a prince, his status doesn't match His Majesty's. But such a graceful appearance is truly rare in the world. Previously, I thought that second young Master Zhao was quite good. However, I don't know why, but when I compare the two of them, I actually feel that second young Master Zhao is slightly inferior. These are all external things, they're not that important. Her Majesty's status is noble. Even if she agrees, I'm afraid the courtiers won't nod their heads easily. When second young Master Zhao left Xiling, he was already a level 7 mystic master. After a few years, I wonder how much he has improved. I'm afraid this duel is going to be difficult. Zhao Zicheng looked at Rong Xiu opposite him and cupped his fists. Please? Rong Xiu nodded indifferently. Seeing how calm he was, Zhao Zicheng frowned. I'll let him be arrogant for a while longer. When we really fight, he'll know what it means to say that there's always someone better than you. There are some people that a mere 7th prince of Yaochen can't obtain. Zhao Zicheng held his breath and focused. He slightly staggered his feet and raised his hand. A silver force as thick as a thumb instantly flew out from his palm. That force was extremely pure. It danced lightly in the wind, but it contained a powerful pressure. Then Zhao Zicheng waved his hands. That force actually split into hundreds of forces in an instant. Moreover, each of them was the same thickness as the first one. The aura of each force was completely the same. To be able to gather these forces together and quickly split them up again, it was enough to prove that Zhao Zicheng's control of the force was already at the peak of perfection. Countless silver lines circled around his hands. They were like swimming fishes, swift and agile. Then these lines began to intertwine and overlap, quickly forming a huge circular Xian formation. As the pattern on the Xian formation became more and more complex, Zhao Zicheng's aura also rose rapidly. In just a few breaths of time, the silver Xian formation was already so complicated that it was dazzling. Bus. A heavy pressure spread out from the Xian formation. As it slowly rotated, the void at the edge of it was actually silently cut open by black spatial cracks. From this, it could be seen how terrifying the power of this Xian formation was. Shengguan Yu was very surprised. He sat up slightly and stared at the Xian formation. I really didn't expect. Zhao Zicheng has already broken through to become a level 8 mystic master. With such pressure, he was definitely a level 8 mystic master. It could be seen that he had not slacked off in the past few years and had been cultivating with all his might. Calculating his age, he was not even 30 years old this year. Even in the entire Tianling dynasty, there were very few people who could break through to level 8 mystic master at this time. After saying that, Shengguan Yu turned his gaze and looked at Rong Xiu opposite him. He was slightly stunned. Rong Xiu stood tall and slender with one hand behind his back, looking calm and composed. He actually hasn't moved yet? When Zhao Zicheng had already started and even the high-level Shen formation was about to be completed, Rong Xiu actually didn't react at all? Is he planning to give up directly? But even if his strength is not as good as Zhao Zicheng's, he should at least try his best, right? What does he mean by standing still like this? Xuanhuan couldn't help but frown. Chu Luiyue looked at this scene and felt very strange, but more than that she was curious. To be honest, until now she still didn't know what level Rong Xiu's strength was at. Moreover, today was a mystic master competition, she really wanted to see how strong Rong Xiu was in this aspect. Zhao Zicheng took in all of Rong Xiu's reactions. His mood, which was already bad, instantly became even worse. This scene looked like he was going all out, but Rong Xiu didn't care about it at all. Zhao Zicheng pursed his lips and injected another stream of force into the Shen formation. A huge figure appeared on the Shen formation. At first glance it looked like a tiger. Startling tiger formation. Roar. Following this earth-shattering roar, the ferocious tiger suddenly leaped out and went straight for Rong Xiu. In the next moment, a white figure suddenly appeared in front of Rong Xiu. It was clearly a white lion. Its icy blue eyes stared coldly at the ferocious tiger phantom as it raised its paw indifferently. Swoosh. The white light was like a blade and in an instant, it tore the incomparably ferocious phantom into pieces. Rong Xiu looked up and his thin lips curved up as he smiled. This won't do. Let's change it to someone I can fight. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 9:18. Above the Shen formation, rays of light gathered and slowly rose like a sun. Blinding light shot out from above, making it hard for people to open their eyes. The temperature of the surrounding space suddenly rose. Almost everyone who was standing nearby could feel the burning pain. Elder Chen Ke looked solemn. With a wave of his sleeve, he immediately set up a barrier around the martial arts field. Are the two of them really going to destroy this place completely? He muttered softly with a trace of shock in his eyes. Although the martial arts field in Xuanhuan Hall was meticulously built and had a strong endurance, Zhao Zicheng was already a level 8 Shen master. Now that he executed this attack with all his strength, it naturally couldn't be underestimated. There was also the man in white beside him and the white lion beside him. Although he didn't know the identity of this person, judging from the fact that he could easily deal with Zhao Zicheng's Shen formation, he was also extremely powerful. If the two of them really fought, it would really be, Xuanhuan snorted when he heard that. Now that it was related to you, how could the two of them hold back? However, at first he was worried that Rong Xiu wasn't Zhao Zicheng's match and that would be embarrassed if he lost. But now, he felt that he was worrying too much. This Rong Xiu was able to contract with a divine beast, so he might have some other trump cards. But, how could the 7th prince of country Yao Qin be so capable? Due to the impact of the Shen formation, there were already charred marks on the ground. It wasn't hard to imagine how terrifying it would be if all the energy on the ground were to hit one person. The force in Zhao Zicheng's body surged wildly, and his face was slightly pale. This Shen formation was a level 8 Shen formation, and it was also the highest level Shen formation that he could execute. In order to study this Shen formation thoroughly, he had spent a total of 3 years. Normally, even when he was fighting with others, he rarely used this move. Because with his current strength, executing this move would consume a lot of his energy. After using this move, regardless of the outcome, he basically wouldn't have the strength to continue fighting. In other words, he could only win if this move won. He drew the last stroke of the Shen formation with difficulty and immediately pushed it forward. Go. A profound formation that was as dazzling as the sun quickly crushed towards Rong Xiu. Everywhere it passed, the ground was scorched black, and even the air seemed to be burning. The distance between the two of them wasn't far to begin with, and Zhao Zicheng had used all his strength in this attack, so in the blink of an eye, the Shen formation had already rushed to a distance of 5 steps away from Rong Xiu. The berserk energy wreaked havoc and intertwined above the profound formation, and it even stirred up a gale. The corners of Rong Xiu's clothes fluttered in the wind. As they fluttered, faint golden patterns could be vaguely seen, like the sparkling ripples on a clear lake in a starry night. At this moment he finally moved. He raised his right hand and drew a line in the air with his slender fingers. A streak of silver light instantly appeared in front of him. Then, his finger moved slightly and drew another line vertically. Just like that, the two silver origin powers intertwined to form a cross in front of him. This cross was only slightly bigger than a person's palm. Compared to Zhao Zicheng's Xian formation, it was so small that it wasn't even worth mentioning. Zhao Zicheng stared at him. Isn't it a little too late for you to start building a Xian formation now? In the end he was too careless. Rong Xiu looked up slightly, and his thin lips curled into a smile. I'm already done. Zhao Zicheng was stunned. What? Already done? Just because of this little cross? What kind of Xian formation was this? Even a level 1 Xian master wouldn't be able to draw two lines so easily and call it a Xian formation. It could be seen that this Rong Xiu really didn't know anything about Xian masters. Since that was the case, why did he have to choose a Xian master level to fight with him? Could it be that he just wanted to vent his anger because he was unconvinced? But what was the use of losing like this? Zhao Zicheng couldn't help but feel annoyed. A man with such mediocre strength and character didn't deserve to stand by her side. If you want to prove your strength, there are plenty of ways. Why do you have to do this? Before Zhao Zicheng could finish speaking, he saw Rong Xiu turn his wrist and push out the cross. From afar, it looked like a silver butterfly that was about to take flight. That butterfly flew past lightly and quickly arrived in front of the huge Xian formation. Then it directly passed through it. A faint sound was heard. Zhao Zicheng's voice stopped abruptly. He looked at the scene in front of him in shock and almost suspected that he had seen wrongly. That little cross, did it directly penetrate his profound formation? One had to know that the Xuanhuan formation contained an extremely abundant amount of force and couldn't be broken so easily. Furthermore, that thing, right at this moment, that terrifying Xian formation suddenly stopped 3 steps away from Rong Xiu. In the next moment, the light on the Xian formation quickly dimmed and was covered by a thick layer of ice. Zhao Zicheng suddenly felt a strong sense of uneasiness. No, crack. The crisp sound of something shattering resounded in the field. After that, the Xian formation shattered into countless pieces. It suddenly dissipated. Pfft. Zhao Zicheng was severely injured and his body shook violently. Chapter 9:19. Zhao Zicheng actually admitted defeat just like that. The moment he said that, everyone had a complicated expression on their faces. Actually, they could already foresee this outcome when they saw the previous scene. Zhao Zicheng clearly didn't have the strength to continue fighting, and he had no chance of winning if this dragged on. He was severely injured, but Rong Xiu didn't even move a single step from the beginning to the end. Looking at the entire scene, he merely raised his hand and casually swiped twice. What was the point of continuing the fight? It was only right for him to admit defeat now. But who would have expected such an outcome 15 minutes ago? Zhao Zicheng was a level 8 Xian master. Elder Qingku, did you see it clearly just now? Was that a Xian formation or not? A few elders from the royal family couldn't help but ask softly. Elder Qingku frowned and took a deep breath. That was indeed a Xian formation. Hearing this, the elders looked at each other in dismay. But how can a Xian formation be like that? It's just two forces intertwined. How can it break a level 8 Xian formation so easily? Elder Qingku stared at Rong Xiu in the arena and didn't explain further. Why else could it be? Naturally, it was because the cross Xian formation executed by Rong Xiu was stronger than Zhao Zicheng's. Generally speaking, the higher the level of a Xian master, the better their control over their force. Under such circumstances, the more complicated the Xian formation was, the stronger its power. This was also why everyone was puzzled by Rong Xiu's victory. In the eyes of ordinary people, that thing of his might not even be considered a Xian formation. But it clearly contained a power that was stronger than a level 8 Xian formation, and it easily destroyed it. Elder Qingku faintly recalled that there was once a rumor that a top-notch Xian master could turn complex Xian formations into extremely simple diagrams, and they could also possess terrifying power. Could it be? Rong Xiu was like that. But those who could reach such a level were all. Where exactly did this Rong Xiu come from? Elder Qingku couldn't help but ask. He is the 7th prince of country Yao Chen and also Yu Er's fiancé. Shengguan Yu also came back to his senses at this time. Hearing Elder Qingku's question in a low voice, he answered solemnly. The elders were all taken aback. Yao Chen? Isn't that the place where Chu Liwei came back? It seemed to be just a vassal country of Tianling. How could there be such a strong person? Shengguan Yu let out a long sigh, but the waves in his heart still hadn't calmed down. He looked at Rong Xiu with admiration in his eyes. He glanced at Chu Liwei and sighed meaningfully. Yours words are true. This Rongxiao's talent and strength were indeed not inferior to hers. Just her talent as a mystic cultivator was enough to crush Zhao Zicheng. Digression. Rongxiao, God knows how many skills I learned to pursue my wife. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 920. Zhao Zicheng choked and felt that Rongxiao was joking. Back then, xuanhuan did have astonishing talent in mystic cultivation, but she was also a level 8 mystic cultivator back then. It was impossible for her to teach someone like Rongxiao, who could crush level 8 mystic cultivators. It seemed like he didn't want to say it. However, Zhao Zicheng didn't mind. The cultivation of mystic cultivators was different from that of martial artists. They usually needed a master to teach them step by step. This way, the master-disciple relationship would be closer. Rongxiao might have his own considerations for not telling him his master. After all, there were indeed many reclusive experts in this world who didn't like to show their faces in public and didn't like to casually reveal their identities. To be able to nurture a disciple like Rongxiao, he must not be a simple person. Zhao Zicheng cupped his hands and didn't ask any more questions. He turned around and limped away. His back, which was originally considered tall and slender, now had a hint of loneliness. Did you just say that I taught you? Chu Luiyue narrowed her black eyes and asked when she saw Rongxiao walking over. She had just recovered to level 6 mystic cultivation and had yet to cross the threshold of level 7. The strength he displayed just now wasn't something she could teach. I actually didn't know that I had such an outstanding disciple. Also, this disciple is like me and has contracted a divine beast. As Chu Luiyue spoke, she turned her gaze and glanced at Xue, who had followed Rongxiao over and was about to pounce over happily. Xue's movements froze. For a moment, it didn't know whether to go forward or retreat. Under Chu Luiyue's scrutinizing gaze, Xue felt guilty. It shook its head and looked around. Actually, it didn't want to hide it. If it wasn't for Master's request, it wouldn't lie to her. Rongxiao suddenly smiled. We've played chess together so many times. Even if I don't want to learn, I know a little. Chu Luiyue was stunned. Only then did he understand what Rongxiao meant. From a certain point of view, a chess game and a profound formation shared an extremely high degree of similarity. Moreover, it tested one's agility and flexibility to an extreme degree. Usually, when she played chess, she would mix it with the Shen formation sometimes. Rongxiao's words seemed to make sense. However, the doubts in Chu Luiyue's heart had not been completely eliminated. Even if Rongxiao was just joking, the top-notch talent and strength that he displayed could not be mistaken. She actually didn't know that he was so powerful above mystic cultivators. There seemed to be countless mysteries hidden in his body. He was mysterious and unfathomable. However, when those eyes were looking at her, they were so sincere and clean. They were open and honest without any concealment. She could feel his heart and inexplicably felt that no matter what, he would always stand by her side and shelter her from the wind and rain. In fact, she didn't trust people so easily. However, when facing Rongxiao, trust and dependence seemed to have become instinctive. Everything became natural. Chu Luiyue pondered for a moment and looked at Xuanhuan. Father, I want to talk to Rongxiao alone. How could Xuanhuan not see that Chu Luiyue had something to ask Rongxiao? He immediately agreed. Anyway, I've already seen him. Has a good eye. If there's anything, you can discuss it yourselves. After saying that, he patted Rongxiao's shoulder meaningfully and left. Elder Jianghu wanted to go forward and ask a few questions. Seeing that Xuanhuan had left, he swallowed the rest of his words and left with the other elders. However, after walking for a long distance, Elder Jianghu still looked dignified. That Rongxiao doesn't seem to be as simple as he looks on the surface. When most of the people around had left, Chu Luiyue said, "Let's go back to Xiaoyu Hall." Rongxiao stepped forward and held her hand with a doting smile on his lips. "Okay." Chu Luiyue glared at him. "What are you doing?" Rongxiao turned his face, leaned closer and chuckled. "Exercising my fiancé's rights." The news that Chu Luiyue had a fiancé from Prince Yao Chen's 7th prince spread rapidly in the palace as if it had grown wings. At the same time, Zhao Zicheng challenged Chu Luiyue to a battle in order to marry her. In the end, he lost miserably, which immediately became the topic of everyone's conversation. When most people heard the first news, they were just shocked and surprised. But thinking about it carefully, this was actually quite normal. After all, Chu Luiyue seemed to be a girl from a fallen family in country Yaochen. Marrying a prince was actually a social climb. However, the second news was too strange. Who was Zhao Zicheng? the second son of the Zhao family. The most outstanding genius of the Zhao family's younger generation. Even though he wasn't in Xiling these few years, most people still remembered how amazing he was back then. They heard that he had already broken through the bottleneck and become a level 8 mystic master. That Rong Xiu actually defeated him? It was simply unbelievable. Didn't this prove that he was even more outstanding than Zhao Zicheng? A prince from a small affiliated country? These things quickly caused a huge uproar in Xiling. And Rong Xiu's name quickly became the focus of everyone's discussion. No matter how turbulent the undercurrents were outside, Xiaoyu Hall was silent at this moment. Chu Luiyue dismissed her attendants, leaving only her and Rong Xiu in the room. Oh, and Shueshue. Ever since she came in, Shueshue had consciously found a corner to lie down, looking as if she had been wronged and admitted her mistake. Looking at its drooping brows, those who didn't know would think that it had just suffered a huge blow. Who would be able to compare this listless white lion with a divine beast that tore an 8th level Shen formation apart with a single claw? However, Chu Luiyue was rather satisfied with Shueshue's proactive attitude of admitting its mistakes. Compared to its master, it was simply too obedient. Chu Luiyue looked at Rong Xiu and narrowed her eyes dangerously. Rong Xiu, don't you have anything to say to me? Rong Xiu's long eyelashes fluttered and he smiled. What do you want to hear? Asking the obvious. Chu Luiyue's gaze scanned him from head to toe. Then, let's start with your strength. You should be a level 9 mystic master now, right? Rong Xiu's lips moved slightly. He wanted to say no, but he swallowed the words back. He nodded. Hearing him admit it himself, Chu Luiyue, who had already expected this, still felt her brows twitch fiercely. Even back then she couldn't cross the threshold of level 9 mystic master. She didn't expect Rong Xiu to be one long ago. Why didn't you say so before? Chu Luiyue's tone carried a hint of warning. Rong Xiu blinked innocently. You didn't ask. Chu Luiyue, she couldn't refute this. Then let me ask you now. Other than being a level 9 mystic master, are you also a celestial physician? Chu Luiyue took a deep breath and asked. Rong Xiu slowly leaned back in his chair and tapped the table rhythmically with one hand. After a moment he looked up. There seemed to be a dense light in his eyes, and his voice was low and languid. What do you think? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 921. Chu Luiyue's eyebrows twitched. The meaning of Rong Xiu's words was self-explanatory. She narrowed her eyes. Then your celestial physician rank? Rong Xiu pondered for a moment and smiled faintly. I know a little. Chu Luiyue's mouth twitched. She would be a fool to believe him. Since when are the disciples of Mingyue Tianshan so powerful? Chu Luiyue had never been to Mingyue Tianshan personally, but she knew a little about it. Mingyue Tianshan was a sect that was independent of the various empires and had a rather aloof feeling. Compared to empires of Yao Chen's level, it was a little stronger. This was also the reason why Rong Xiu was sent to Mingyue Tianshan when he was born in poor health. There were powerhouses that the Yao Chen Empire could not match. However, although Mingyue Tianshan was powerful, it was still outside Heaven's canopy and could not be compared to the Tianling dynasty. Then, how did they nurture a powerhouse like Rong Xiu? Rong Xiu seemed to have seen through her doubts, so he leaned back and looked at her with interest. You were born in Yao Chen. Aren't you already a powerhouse that ordinary people can't reach? Chu Luiyue was speechless for a moment. After her rebirth, she did not have the Tianjing Yuan meridian from her previous life. It was almost as if she had to start from scratch. She had indeed suffered a lot on the way back from Yao Chen to Xiling. At the same time, she had encountered enough luck to be where she was today. If she could do it, why couldn't others? Moreover, from the beginning she had already determined that Rong Xiu was extremely dangerous. At that time, she had already expected that he was extraordinary. But now, she clearly realized that she was much stronger than he had imagined. Chu Luiyue was silent for a while before she said, Rong Xiu, you still haven't told me where your identity as the Son of God came from. As soon as he finished speaking, the room fell into silence. Rong Xiu looked into her eyes. There seemed to be waves of light swirling in his phoenix eyes, like a whirlpool that could completely devour people. After a while, Rong Xiu suddenly said, Do you still remember my mother? Chu Luiyue was a little surprised by his sudden question, but he still nodded. Who didn't know Consort Wan, who was the queen of the empire of Yao Chen's harem back then? Rong Xiu smiled, but there was no smile in his eyes. His voice was extremely light. The so-called Holy Sun, Is my identity in my mother's family? Chu Luiyue had thought of many answers before, but none of them were close to this. His mother's family? Didn't they say that Consort Wan came from an ordinary family? How come now? Chu Luiyue suddenly recalled the day when the third prince led his troops to rebel. Rong Xiu and Emperor Jiawen seemed to have a decisive battle. At that time, when Emperor Jiawen wanted to break through and enter heaven's canopy, Rong Xiu once said something. He seemed to have said that his mother's wish in life was to not let Emperor Jiawen step into heaven's canopy. Yes. Now that he thought about it, the cause and effect of everything could be explained. Chu Luiyue widened her eyes slightly. Why your mother is from heaven's canopy? Rong Xiu nodded. Chu Luiyue was dazed for quite a while. I see. She had suspected it before, but as too many things happened later on, she had thrown this matter to the back of her mind. This means that Rong Xiu is actually from heaven's canopy. His mother's status is clearly much higher than Emperor Jiawen's. Back then, my mother went out of heaven's canopy to train. When she met with danger in a territory, she met father by accident, and the two of them got together. But when they got married, my mother didn't know father's identity. Rong Xiu lightly said. Chu Luiyue pressed her lips against each other. Even though Rong Xiu said it very simply, she could roughly guess the ins and outs of the matter. A woman from heaven's canopy who married Emperor Jiawen was marrying a lower status. Besides, from various situations, Rong Xiu's mother's clan didn't seem to be an ordinary family. Consort Wan was young and naive. When she met Emperor Jiawen, she thought that she was destined to be with him, so she didn't hesitate to be with him. In the end, she didn't expect that she would marry an emperor with a harem of 3,000. No one would be willing to accept and forgive such deceit. It was no wonder that there were rumors that after Consort Wan entered the palace, she was still depressed even though Emperor Jiawen doted on her a lot. She only stayed in the palace for a year or two before moving out. She also didn't go back until she died. As for her background, it should be made up by Emperor Jiawen. After I was born, mother sent me to Mingyue Tianshan. A few years later, the clan's people came and wanted to bring mother and me back. It was a pity that mother had already passed away. Rong Xiu's tone was calm, and his expression was quiet as if he were talking about someone else's matters. Back then, mother secretly married an outsider, and it went against the clan's rules. After she found out about father's identity, she became a concubine and was too ashamed to return home. Thus, she kept hiding from the clan's people until she passed away. Actually, back then she sent Rong Xiu to Mingyue Tianshan because she didn't want his identity to be exposed. She thought that she could be at ease if she handed Rong Xiu over there. However, many things that she didn't expect happened after that. Of course, she wouldn't know about all of this. Chu Luiyue looked at him with a normal expression as if she had already seen through all of this, but her heart still ached slightly. So, all these years you haven't been staying at Mingyue Tianshan? She asked softly. And Rong Xiu responded. I would come back occasionally, but I wouldn't stay for long. I didn't find a suitable time to tell you about this. Are you still angry? Chu Luiyue sighed in her heart and shook her head. It was naturally very difficult for him to return to the clan with such a background. Rong Xiu had a grudge against Emperor Jiawen, and they had completely fallen out back then. Hence, he definitely wouldn't be willing to go back to Emperor Yao Chen. This was probably one of the reasons why he decided to give Emperor Yao Chen's throne to the third prince after planning everything. As for his mother's family, it was obvious that his identity was a little awkward. Rong Xiu, it must have been tough on you all these years, right? From what Rong Xiu said previously, it wasn't hard to guess how strict Consort Wan's family was. And Rong Xiu. To them, they might not be willing to accept him. Rong Xiu thought for a while. It's all right. Even if he obtained the position of Prince of Grace, many people were eyeing him covetously, and many wanted to rebel. Hence, it was a little troublesome to deal with them. Rong Xiu nodded and saw her heart-aching eyes. He smiled slightly, held her hand tightly, and pulled her into his embrace. Her gentle and sweet aura instantly filled his arms. He hugged her slender waist and buried his head in her shoulder, smelling the faint fragrance of her cloud-like hair. A certain empty place in his heart seemed to have been filled. I'm fine. He spoke softly as if he was murmuring and pouring out his heart. I have you, or with you it's enough. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Yuan. Chapter 922. Chu Liyue's heart softened, and she lowered her head and gently kissed him on the lips. It was slightly cool and soft. Rong Xiu, I'll be your family in the future, okay? She retreated half an inch, stared into his eyes and said seriously. Even though Xiao didn't say it, she could feel the lonely aura on him as if it came from his bones. His hands were cold and so were his lips. But she thought his heart was warm. If he was alone in this world, she was willing to stay by his side. With true love as close as family. She didn't want to ask anything else. She only knew that he was him. Everything else had nothing to do with them. Whether he was the 7th prince of Yao Qin or the holy son of a certain family, it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were each other's. Xiao looked at her. Suddenly he hugged her tightly with one hand, held her face with the other, and kissed her. His hand was very strong, as if he wanted to crush her into his bones and blood. However, his other hand was unbelievably careful, as if he was holding a rare treasure and was afraid of bumping into it. Amidst the endless madness, there was also a strong restraint that was filled with love. The vague words scattered between his lips and teeth. Xiao's victory over Zhao Zicheng had a far greater impact than expected. Because other than Zhao Zicheng, there were many young talents in Xiling City who had some thoughts about Chu Luiyue. Whether it was identity, appearance, or talent, the current Chu Luiyue was absolutely top-notch. When she was still the princess, countless people admired her. Now that she had killed Jiang Yuqing and xuanhuan, ascended to the throne and returned in glory, countless people naturally bowed to her. However, Xiao's appearance instantly disrupted these people's thoughts. Zhao Zicheng was the first to be beaten up. The rest of the people naturally calmed down and had to think carefully. Even a level 8 mystic master was defeated by Xiao. One could imagine how strong he was. It was impossible to say that he wasn't afraid. But at the same time, there were also many people who were skeptical. Zhao Zicheng was a famous genius in the Western Tomb and could be said to be one of the best among the younger generation. How could he lose to a mere prince from Yao Qin? However, the news did indeed come from the palace. It was said that there were many people who saw it with their own eyes. For a time, there were different opinions which made many people curious about Xiao. Countless people wanted to see for themselves what kind of person this Xiao was. Chu Luiyue had originally planned to wait until the matters in the Tianling dynasty were settled before confessing everything to Xiao and putting the wedding on the agenda. However, he did not expect that Chuning would be taken away. After this incident, the wedding could not be carried out for the time being. After all, although she looked like she was only at the middle of rank 6, her combat power had already reached the level of a rank 7 martial artist. The bitter training she had gone through in the Red Moon Desert wasn't for nothing. Xiao smiled and responded. Okay. Xue, who was lying in the field, looked at her master with disdain. You don't even have a draft when you lie, Pui? Xiao sensed Xue's gaze and glanced at it coldly. Let's not talk about the past. Now that you hadn't fully recovered, if he really attacked without holding back and hurt his wife, he would be the one feeling heartache. What else could he do if he could only pamper the wife he pursued? At this moment, Chu Luiyue moved and went straight for Xiao. She was extremely fast. In the Red Moon Desert, Chu Luiyue's most obvious improvement was her close combat power after fighting with those puppets. Therefore her speed had increased by a lot. In addition, now that she had recovered her identity, she didn't need to hide the many cultivation techniques that she had cultivated in the past. Naturally, it was more convenient. In the blink of an eye, the slender and tall figure had already rushed in front of Xiao. She clenched her fist and threw a punch. Before she could see how Xiao moved, his figure had already disappeared in front of her. Chu Luiyue missed her attack, so she turned around without thinking and gave a side kick. Bang! Xiao easily clamped down on her ankle with one hand. Chu Luiyue was shocked and took advantage of the situation to flip in the air. Xiao quickly released his hand and avoided her attack. Tisk, are you trying to murder your husband? Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 923. Chu Luiyue landed lightly on the ground like a swallow. She looked at Xiao and snorted when she heard his teasing. You can easily block my attack without using your full strength. Isn't it inappropriate for you to say that? Xiao didn't even make a move just now. He just defended himself. But even so, she was still able to sense that his cultivation level was definitely far above hers. As you are a sparring partner, you have to have some strength. Otherwise, what if you get beaten down? Xiao raised his hand with his palm facing up. He bent his fingers slightly and said with a smile, "Are you coming?" Chu Luiyue gritted her teeth. The force in her body surged crazily, and her aura rose to its peak. A star gradually flickered on the tip of her finger. Come. Jingshin finger. It was impossible to pose any threat to Rongxiao with a small fight. She could only go all out now. A satisfied smile flashed across Rongxiao's eyes. If she wanted to improve her strength quickly and steadily, she had to constantly challenge her limits. Coincidentally, he knew where her limits were the best. Therefore, he was the most suitable person to be this person. In the next moment, a cluster of golden flames appeared in Rongxiao's palm. After Elder Chen Ku returned, he pondered for a long time and finally went to see Shangguanyu. When he arrived at Yuanhe Hall, Shangguanyu was reading in his room. He raised his head when he heard the commotion. "You're finally here." He didn't look surprised. Apparently, he had already expected this. "Please take a seat." Elder Chen Ku was an elder of 3 dynasties. His status was extraordinary. Even Shangguanyu had to be polite to him. Seeing Shangguanyu's reaction, Elder Chen Ku knew that they were thinking about the same thing. Therefore, he didn't stand on ceremony and sat down. It seems that His Majesty also feels that something is wrong. Elder Chen Ku frowned and went straight to the point. "That Rongxiao's identity? I'm afraid it's not that simple. Based on the strength that he had displayed previously, how could a prince of country Yaochen possess such strength? Even if he was talented, without sufficient resources and opportunities, it was impossible for him to reach his current level. I've seen his father before." Shangguanyu put down the book in his hand and suddenly said such a sentence. "Mediocre and mediocre." Even if such a person was fortunate enough to give birth to a talented child, it wouldn't be too exaggerated. Rongxiao was obviously far surpassed this standard. "You mean?" Elder Chen Ku was bewildered. "I have a feeling I've seen his aura before." Shangguanyu rubbed his temples. "But I can't remember at the moment." However, he had a good impression of Rongxiao the moment he saw him. Therefore, she didn't continue to ask him many questions, but let you ask him. "Elder Chen, what do you? Since he is here, he must have something." Elder Chen Ku hesitated for a while. "Is Zhou's? Too?" Shangguanyu paused and looked up with a sharp glint in his eyes. "Elder Chen Ku, do you think so too?" Level 9 mystic cultivators are extremely strong, just like level 9 warriors. They are only one step away from the next level. There are only a few of such cultivators in the entire Tianling dynasty. Rongxiao is so young, but he's already at this level. Other than that side, who else can nurture such a person? Shangguanyu stroked his beard and seemed to agree. "That's what I think too. Was born with a Tianjing Yuan meridian and was a once-in-a-thousand-years genius. That's why she could reach a level that ordinary people can't reach in their lifetime. As for Rongxiao, he couldn't see through. Taizu should know more about this matter, right?" Elder Chen Ku looked a little serious. "But it seems that Taizu didn't talk to her about this. Taizu must have his own considerations. Maybe he has already told you, or..." Shangguanyu pondered for a moment. "Now that you, has ascended to the throne, many things have settled down. I'll find a time to talk to her in detail." Elder Chen Ku nodded and then murmured curiously. "If Rongxiao is really someone from that side, why did he appear as Prince Yao Qin? His Majesty was killed back then and he was reborn over there. Isn't this too much of a coincidence?" There was one more thing that Elder Chen Ku didn't say. If Rongxiao's real identity is really as we think, then it's really hard to say who's going to marry who in this marriage. Shangguanyu fell into deep thought and waved his hand. "Forget it. As long as you recognizes him and he recognizes you, it's fine. As for the rest, there's no need to care so much. By the way, I asked you to investigate Jiang Yuqing before. What did you find out?" Elder Chen Ku calmed down and sat up straight. His expression was much more serious. "You don't say. I really found something wrong. Jiang Yuqing seems to have been secretly contacting someone in the past few years. Moreover, it seems that he has been following the other party's orders and has been working for the other party. It's just that he has been very secretive, so we can't find out who the other party is." Shangguanyu snorted coldly. "So, there's really a master behind him?" "Yes. In addition." Elder Chen Ku hesitated for a moment and stopped talking. "In addition?" Shangguanyu asked. "In addition. Mu Qinghe seems to have something to do with this matter." Shangguanyu frowned tightly. "He's Jiang Yuqing's man. It's normal to have something to do with him." "No." Elder Chen Ku shook his head. "If Mu Qinghe is simply Jiang Yuqing's subordinate, it stands to reason that she is not qualified to contact the person behind this. But that's not the case. She seems to have contacted the person behind Jiang Yuqing's back." Digression. The fifth update is a little late. Happy Chinese Valentine's Day, everyone. Don't forget to receive the monthly red packet. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. He didn't say anything specific, but the main idea was that she didn't know what was good for her. As for Mu Qinghe, since that day he had been staying in his room and never came out. His Highness didn't restrict his freedom when he locked him up in the Mu residence, but he didn't seem to want to come out. Hence, ever since then Jian Fengqi came every day. However, it didn't seem to be effective. Mu Qinghe was a stubborn person who would not be moved by force or persuasion. I crossed his arms and shook his head. Actually, he couldn't figure it out either. Back then, Her Highness was devoted to Mu Qinghe and was even more devoted to him than to the 13th Yu Guard. How could Mu Qinghe, this ingrate, betray Her Highness? Yet, His Highness didn't have the intention to kill him until now. I swung the hammer in his hand and walked away. The door wasn't locked. Jian Fengqi pushed the door open and saw Mu Qinghe sitting there. Hearing the noise, he didn't react as if he didn't care at all. Seeing him like this, Jian Fengqi was furious. He snorted and leaned against the door frame. Are you going to be like this forever? Mu Qinghe didn't say anything. Are you happy to say those words on purpose and make her run away? Jian Fengqi frowned. His eyes, which had always been flirtatious, seemed to be covered with a layer of thick frost at this time. Mu Qinghe finally reacted. I'm just telling the truth. If you do something wrong, you should be punished. Jian Fengqi was so angry that his teeth itched. Bullshit. Now isn't the time for you to beg me to help her find evidence. Jian Fengqi quickly stepped forward and grabbed Mu Qinghe's collar. Believe it or not, I'm going to tell her everything right now. Mu Qinghe frowned and pried his hand away. It doesn't matter if you tell her. Can you prove that I have nothing to do with what happened in the past? It doesn't matter whether she kills me or not. Now that the truth is out, everything is fine, isn't it? I think Jian Fengqi wasn't happy to hear this. He was about to hit him again when he inadvertently caught a glimpse of blood on the back of his hand. He suddenly froze and took a closer look. He wasn't injured, and Mu Qinghe was the only one who touched his hand just now. This was Mu Qinghe's blood. Jian Fengqi's face suddenly changed. What's wrong with you? Mu Qinghe saw the blood on the back of his hand and frowned. He was so careless. It's nothing. Mu Qinghe said lightly. She nonchalantly took a handkerchief from the side and wiped the blood off her hand. But that white handkerchief was soon completely stained with blood. The corner of Jian Fengqi's eyes twitched violently. The amount of blood Mu Qinghe was bleeding? Something was clearly wrong. He chased after Mu Qinghe and made a move, wanting to grab him. Mu Qinghe dodged easily. But she lost her balance and crashed into the chair next to her. Mu Qinghe managed to catch her with difficulty, but her face turned pale and blood flowed out from the corner of her mouth. Jian Fengqi was even more shocked. This is thump. Mu Qinghe fainted and suddenly collapsed to the ground. Xiaoyu Palace. Time passed by minute. Unknowingly, it was already evening. The sun was setting in the west, reflecting a gorgeous glow on the thick clouds. The sparring between Chu Luiyue and Rong Xiu had finally come to an end. Her clothes were drenched in sweat, and her strength was almost completely exhausted. On the other hand, other than Rong Xiu's slightly messy clothes, there was nothing unusual about him. It was as if he had just taken a leisurely stroll instead of sparring with Chu Luiyue for so long. Chu Luiyue panted heavily, looking at Rong Xiu, and couldn't help but grind her teeth. This man had always suppressed his strength to a level higher than hers. How infuriating. You actually hid so much of your strength. She was about to walk forward, but her body went limp and she fell forward directly. Rong Xiu went forward and pulled her into his arms, then carried her horizontally with a smile on his lips. Not at all, I'm just a little stronger than you, this time. You'll definitely win next time. Chu Luiyue pinched his face and snorted heavily. I'll definitely surpass you next time on the Qingyun roll. Digression. Happy Chinese Valentine's Day again, mobile users. Please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 925. Rong Xiu's movements suddenly paused. His brows twitched imperceptibly as he looked at Chu Luiyue in his arms and slowly asked, "What did you just say?" Chu Luiyue was also stunned. The azure cloud roll? What was that? Why would she suddenly say such a thing? It was as if she had said the same thing before. I don't know either. Chu Liwei murmured and immediately frowned as she kept recalling and searching in her mind. But she couldn't remember anything. Rong Xiao stared at her face and saw a faint layer of doubt in her eyes. His hanging heart relaxed a little. He calmly turned his gaze away and lowered his eyelids to hide the emotions in his eyes. "I'll send you back first." Chu Liwei nodded absent-mindedly as she wrapped her arms around Rong Xiao's neck and leaned on his shoulder as she thought about what had just happened. The Azure Cloud Roll, she said that she must win against Rong Xiao on the Azure Cloud Roll next time? Rong Xiao. She suddenly spoke and glanced at Rong Xiao. "Have you heard of the Azure Cloud Roll?" The man shook his head as the afterglow shone on his smooth and perfect side profile. It was still breathtaking. But he didn't say anything. Chu Liwei had some doubts in her heart. Rong Xiao's meaning was that he didn't know. But why would she say such a thing to Rong Xiao just now? Perhaps this was related to the memory she had lost? Chu Liwei fell into deep thought and planned to find a chance to think about it when she returned. Rong Xiao carried her and walked back. Fortunately, after Chu Liwei returned, she had cleaned up the people in the palace. There were almost no palace servants left in Xiaoyu Hall. In addition, this martial arts field was a relatively private place in Xiaoyu Hall. From here, she could directly return to her sleeping quarters. Rong Xiao didn't meet anyone along the way, so he directly carried her to her bedroom. Just as he shouted, he suddenly realized that the person in his arms was quiet. He looked down and saw that the woman in his arms was leaning on his shoulder with her eyes closed. Her breathing was even and she seemed to have fallen asleep. Rong Xiao couldn't help but laugh, but he also felt a little heartache. It was probably because the previous training was too tiring. However, the fact that she could fall asleep so quickly in his arms proved that she was at ease. This made Rong Xiao feel a lot more relieved. He carefully placed her on the bed, wiped her sweat, and covered her with a thin blanket. Looking at her peaceful sleeping face, Rong Xiao's eyes gradually overflowed with gentleness. When she was like this in the past, although she was often exhausted, it was very rare for her to fall asleep directly. Returning to the West Hill for revenge this time must have consumed a lot of her energy and mental energy. It was a good thing that she could have a good rest now. Rong Xiao held her wrist. A pure and gentle energy slowly flowed into her body. In her sleep, she seemed to be dreaming of something and whispered something. Rong Xiao listened and vaguely heard that it was related to the green cloud roll. He frowned slightly. Now that she had not broken through to the 7th level, it was reasonable to say that that thing was still sealed in her body and she should not be thinking of this. But it seemed that it was much faster than he had expected. With the nourishment of Rong Xiao's power, Chu Liue's brows gradually relaxed and she finally fell asleep peacefully. Rong Xiao stood in his original spot quietly for a while and looked at Tuanzi, who had appeared at the side without him knowing. "Take good care of her." Tuanzi nodded sensibly, which was rare for her. Rong Xiao then turned and left. Xuexue followed closely behind. Walking out of Xiaoyu Hall, Rong Xiao looked into the distance and in a certain direction. If he remembered correctly, Huayang Hall should be over there. It was also the place where xuanhuan and jianghu were imprisoned. Rong Xiao thought for a while and turned around to leave the palace. Chu Liwei had a long and messy dream. In the dream, she seemed to be competing with someone in order to win first place on the green cloud roll. The other party's face and figure were very blurry. But his strength was extremely strong. She lost again and again and lost again and again. Sometimes it was very quiet, sometimes it was very noisy as if many people were watching and cheering. She wanted to see the other party's face clearly but she could not. After some time, even she could not remember how many times she had competed. She finally won the competition again. She was very happy and the person opposite her seemed to be very happy too. Someone was shouting something around them. She vaguely heard that it seemed to be you. The person opposite her suddenly took a step forward. It was as if he had suddenly broken through a layer of fog. His figure gradually became clear. It was a young man wearing a black brocade robe, with a green jade belt around his waist, easily outlining the man's tall figure with wide shoulders and narrow waist. He seemed to have said something to her. The surroundings were quiet for a moment, and then there was a burst of enthusiastic cheers and screams, as if it was boiling. As for his face, it was gradually revealed. Whoosh! Chu Liwei suddenly opened her eyes. Her body was covered in cold sweat, and her heart was beating so fast that her ears were numb. She calmed down for a while before she realized that she was dreaming. Dumpling flew over and rubbed against her face intimately. Chu Liwei hugged Dumpling in her arms, and the waves in her heart gradually calmed down. After waking up, everything in the dream began to quickly forget. That man's figure seemed very familiar. But that face, in the end she did not see it clearly. An absurd thought was born in her heart. She vaguely felt that the man in the dream who was competing with her seemed to be the one on the octagonal pavilion on the cliff, and he was extremely similar to the first master. Night fell. The 100 Herbs building was already closed, and Yuling was checking things on the 3rd floor. Suddenly he heard something. When he turned around, he was so scared that his heart almost jumped out. "Master." He hurriedly bowed. "Master, why are you now?" Rongxiu waved his hand. "I'm just here to take something." Yuling heaved a sigh of relief. God knows how he felt when he turned around and saw his master standing there. "Yes." Yuling hurriedly responded. Seeing Rongxiu walk inside, he was still very surprised. Now, his master's name was well known in West Hill. Everyone knew that the new emperor had a fiancée. Although he was born in Yaoqin, he defeated Zhao Zicheng. "Did you pick it for madam?" Yuling followed him and asked carefully. In fact, when he learned that Chu Luiyue was actually from Shangguanyu, he was also very shocked. He was wondering why his master returned to Yaoqin back then, so that was the reason. Rongxiu nodded and walked to an inconspicuous shelf. On it was a fist-sized, inconspicuous pine stone jade box. Perhaps it was because it had not been touched for a long time, but it was covered with a faint layer of dust. Rongxiu did not seem to care and raised his hand to take it. Yuling was slightly surprised. So this was what his master wanted. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 926. Yuling wanted to ask something, but he didn't. Rongxiu had just put away the green pine stone jade box when there was a knock on the door. "Master, I have something to report." It was Yumo's voice. Yuling looked at Rongxiu. Rongxiu said lightly, "Just come in." Yuling then understood that it was his master who called Yumo over. Yumo pushed the door open and entered. When he saw Yuling, he nodded gently and then bowed to Rongxiu. "Master, you guessed right. Jiang Yuqing has contacted that person again." Yuling was shocked when he heard this and immediately said, "Master, I'll go and guard outside." Rongxiu nodded and Yuling hurriedly left. When he left, he even carefully closed the door. Walking out of the door, Yuling's expression was slightly serious. It seemed that his master was going to make a move. Yumo had been staying in West Hill during this period, secretly investigating Jiang Yuqing's matter. After the matter was exposed some time ago, the entire Jiang family was executed, and Jiang Yuqing was also imprisoned. Yumo waited for a long time before he finally found this clue. The time should be yesterday. A look of disdain flashed across Yumo's eyes. He chose this time because everyone in the Jiang family is dead, and everyone has lowered their guard against him. This Jiang Yuqing is really selfish. In order to survive, he is willing to let the entire family die with him. Rongxiu smiled faintly. He has always only cared about himself, so it's not surprising that he would do such a thing. Jiang Yuqing thought that he had climbed up the social ladder, but he was just too smart. "Have you found out the identity of that person?" Yumo paused and shook his head. "I only found out that the other party is Jiang Yuqing's backer, but I didn't find out his identity." Rongxiu didn't seem to care. "If it's so easy for you to find out, then I'm too incompetent. Jiang Yuqing is now trapped in Huayang Palace. How did the news get out?" Yumo's expression became serious. "There's a special way to send messages in Huayang Palace." No matter. The next day, the morning sun shone in through the window. Mu Qinghe's eyes moved and he finally opened them. His vision was blurry at first, and then he subconsciously closed his eyes. "You're awake?" A cold voice came from the side. Mu Qinghe turned to look and saw a familiar face. Jian Fengqi crossed his arms as he sneered at him. There were 2 dark circles under his eyes, and he looked a little haggard as if he hadn't rested well. "Es to me de saves titius, from now on tes. Understand? To him to his dis tus ttsd his is tus her, esses, ssss." He knew his own body. Jian Fengqi didn't need to. Hearing this, Jian Fengqi was instantly infuriated, and he couldn't wait to go forward and beat him up. Thinking that he was the one who saved Mu Qinghe, he suppressed his anger and pointed at Mu Qinghe angrily. "You're really something. I must have had nothing better to do to help you." Mu Qinghe leaned against the bed and closed her eyes, seemingly unmoved. "You're not the only one I owe my life to." Chu Luiyue's was already too much for him to pay off. Jian Fengqi suppressed his anger and didn't want to continue arguing with him. He stepped forward, pulled a chair and sat opposite Mu Qinghe. Speak. What's wrong with your body? Mu Qinghe said indifferently. "'Tis just an old injury." Jian Fengqi sneered. "Do you really think I'm a celestial physician for nothing? The poison in your body is quite old, isn't it? It's extremely cold and has already penetrated deep into your organs. Even if you can't clear it, you'll be dead by now. This kind of poison doesn't exist in the West Hill, nor in the entire Tianling. Don't tell me you don't know." Mu Qinghe didn't say anything, as if she couldn't be bothered to explain. The two fell into a silent confrontation. After a while, Jian Fengqi stood up. "Don't worry. I can't do anything about your poison, but that doesn't mean others can't. I'll go to the palace and ask someone." He turned around and left. Just as he was about to step out of the door, he heard a voice behind him. "Wait." Chongshu Pavilion. Yi Ranran arrived at the herb garden early in the morning, ready to take care of the herbs. But when she arrived, she saw that someone was already there. She took a closer look and exclaimed in surprise, "You're a genius. Pavilion Master." Yuchi Song cut off the withered leaves of the Longting Ganoderma in her hand and straightened up. She smiled kindly at Yi Ranran. Yi Ranran walked over and asked curiously, "Pavilion Master, why are you here personally?" Yuchi Song smiled. "I have nothing to do anyway, so I came to take a look." Yi Ranran squinted her eyes. "You miss Luyu?" Most of these herbs were taken care of by Luyu. It wasn't hard to understand why the Pavilion Master was here. Yuchi Song smiled and gently knocked on her head. "You can call her that in our Chongshu Pavilion, but you can't call her that outside." She had regained her identity. Moreover, she was the emperor and the supreme existence of the Tianling dynasty. Naturally, she couldn't be treated as casually as before. Yi Ranran stuck out her tongue. Ranran knows. It took her a long time to accept this matter. "Pavilion Master, if you miss her, why don't you just go to the palace? After all, the Pavilion Master was Lu Yu's master, wasn't she?" Yuchi Song sighed and shook her head. "She must be very busy this time. Besides." "Pavilion Master." Lu Jiao suddenly ran over quickly. "Pavilion Master," Qi Dai said he remembered what happened in Nanjiang. Yuchi Song's eyes lit up. "Let's go." Shilling City seemed to gradually calm down. The Jiang family and the Xiahou family, who had once been arrogant and insufferably arrogant, were completely destroyed overnight. In addition, many clans and people were also implicated and robbed in this turmoil. Days passed, and these shocking events seemed to gradually subside. People were very forgetful. Not long after, Shilling City had already regained its usual liveliness. It was as if those things had never happened. And the strong smell of blood after the beheading finally dissipated completely. Ordinary people continued their lives as usual. It was as if they had long forgotten about xuanhuan and Jiang Yuqing, who were imprisoned. However, in a place where everyone couldn't see, there was a surging undercurrent. A month passed in the blink of an eye. It was almost the 1-month period agreed on the note. In Zhaoyu Palace, Chu Luiyue was cultivating. She sat cross-legged with her hands on her knees. Vigorous force surged wildly. The force of heaven and earth in the surroundings began to pour into her body. She was preparing to break through. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.